Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I'm Vince D'Addario. That's Brian Driscoll, and we are here basically for part two of our Notre Dame year in review. We did offense on Tuesday. It is now time to turn the proverbial page to defense. And, the good, bad, the ugly, all of it. We're going to talk about all of it with the defensive side of the football today, and then we'll clean it up with a mailbag at the end. So lots of good defensive talk today, Brian. And how are you doing today? I know you missed yesterday. Are we ready to go today?
Can't kick this cough, man.
Yeah.
And it was really kicking my butt, especially yesterday. But
Yeah,
I'm here today, and I figured if I'm going to either miss yesterday or I'm going to have to miss today because my voice was pretty much shot. And I was like, you know what? I got to make sure I'm on for tomorrow in the mailbag, so I'm ready to rock and roll.
Boom. Yes, today we've got defense. Tomorrow we're going to have a Friday free-for-all mailbag. We're going old school with it, and frankly, I'm excited about it. So, and then we've got IB Nation Sports Talk tonight as well, and then we're bringing back IB Nation Sports Talk Friday Fire at 5 o'clock on Fridays as well. So that is back now that the season is over. We're going to be doing our Friday Fire shows as well. So stay tuned for all of that fun.
Just so you know, you're probably going to be late to that show since we're doing a mailbag tomorrow.
It's a free-for-all mailbag.
He's going to have to wait. And get started a little bit later.
Yeah, it is what it is. So, but anyway, today is the defense, Brian. And, I would say the defense is, it's the funniest thing for me personally, because last year at this time, I felt like we were warding off the people that wanted all these defensive coaches fired. You know what I mean? Al Golden needed to be fired. Al Washington needed to be fired. And look, I understood where fans were coming from to a degree.
There were reasons to be critical of the job they did, even though that some took it too far.
Yeah, correct.
With, you know what I mean? Like, there was reasons to be critical of the job Al Washington did in year one. There's reasons to be critical of some of the things we saw from Al Golden in year one. But this is year one.
Correct.
And that's part of the growing process.
And year two proved to be better than year one, pretty much across the board.
You think?
And here's the thing,
we're just setting the standard pretty low today, huh? We're setting,
I know,
we're being calm, significantly better in year two.
Well, and here's the thing for me, the defense wasn't bad last year. It wasn't bad. I believe they were top 20 or top 15 in scoring defense last year. And I mean, there were some good things from this defense last year.
Yeah.
And they took a leap forward across the board. And I think that's the topic for me, is that they were a good defense. They became close to a great defense this year.
They were a great defense this year. Yeah. I mean, look, when you rank in the top 5 to 10 in that many categories, you're an elite defense.
Okay.
I thought they played well in most of the big games. I mean, they did a great job against Ohio State for the most part, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But you just look at the numbers. I mean, the numbers don't lie, Vince, and it wasn't like something that they did because they dominated the bad teams and then gave up a bunch of yards to good teams.
Right.
That's not how this season went. And when you look at this defense, they never gave up 400 yards of offense this season. The most yards they gave up in a game was 366. That's the most yards they gave up in a game this year. That was to Ohio State. And a big chunk of that came on the last drive of the game.
Right.
So you're talking about a team that never allowed more than 366 yards of offense in a game. You're talking about a team that improved in just about every statistical category, team category, not all, but most. Some they took a step back in a very surprising fashion. But when you look at the main statistics, I mean, let's just look at who this defense was this year, Vince, and just break it down and talk about, what made them so good and why this defense was so effective and so effective and so consistently, in my opinion. And I think that's a big part of this. Is it's one thing to be good, it's another thing to be consistently good. And that's what I felt this defense was. I mean, let's talk about scoring defense this year. Notre Dame finished the season ranked 7th in scoring defense, 6th amongst Power 5 teams. They were 0.03 points behind Georgia, who was next in line. The 4 teams above them were all Big Ten teams, which, as I discussed the other day, that's because the Big Ten sucks. Offenses in the Big Ten are freaking terrible.
They're terrible.
Which is why you have the top 4 scoring defenses in college football are Big Ten teams. The number 13 team is also a Big Ten team. The number 21 team is also a Big Ten team. So 6 of your top 21 scoring defenses were from the Big Ten. Why? Because their offenses suck. And so the numbers were inflated a little bit because of that. But Notre Dame was a good scoring defense the year before. In 2022, they ranked 39th. But if you recall, their numbers were inflated. They gave up like 4 pick sixes that season. They gave up about 21.5 points per game just defensively, and they improved that to 15.9 this year. And again, as I said, ranked 7th in college football. Total defense this season, Notre Dame ranked 5th. They only gave up 276.3 yards per game.
Wow.
That is a really impressive number. And, that's just a great number. I mean, think about how good the 2012 defense was. The 2012 defense gave up 305.5 yards per game and 4.78 yards per play. The 2013 defense gave up 276.3 yards per game and 4.4 yards per play. And the yards per play matters to me, Vince, because you could kind of look at it and say, hey, the thought process is fewer plays this year because of the clock rules. And so you say, well, yeah, they did a better job because they ran fewer plays.
Yeah.
And that's not really how the season played out. I mean, you go back and look again, start with 2012, and they gave up 4.8 yards per play. And then you look at 2013, 5.1. We'll just ignore the Van Gorder years because they were terrible in all of those years in yards per play. 2017 under Mike Elko, 5.1 yards per play. 2018 was a playoff team. They went for 4.7 yards per play. 2019 was 4.7 yards per play. 2020 was a playoff team, 5.6 yards per play. 2021, 5.3 yards per play. 2022, 5.2 yards per play. And they dropped all the way down to 4.4 this year in yards allowed per play. They only allowed 3 opponents all year to go above 5 yards per play in a game. Most of the last decade, they did that over the course of a season average. This year, they only had 3 of their 13 opponents went for over 5 yards a play. And it was Pitt, which got a lot of it off the second team defense. Let's be honest. They hit like 2 big passing plays, and they were 5.00. Louisville went for 5.16, and Ohio State went for 5.63 because they gave up that 60-yard touchdown run. That's it. Everybody else was sub 5. And there just was a level of consistency with the defense this year, Vince, that was really, really impressive. But 5th in total defense this season. They ranked 5th in yards per play allowed. Literally every team ahead of them was a Big Ten team. That was a big jump from last year. Pass defense, they were pretty good in pass defense last season. They ranked 23rd last year. This year they ranked 3rd in fewest yards allowed per game. They ranked 2nd in lowest completion percentage allowed. They ranked 3rd in fewest yards allowed per attempt. They ranked number 1 in passer rating above all those terrible Big Ten teams. Last year, they gave up 20 touchdown passes and intercepted 10 passes. This season, Notre Dame only allowed 8 touchdown passes the whole year and picked off 16. So last year, they had double the touchdown passes to interceptions, 20 to 10. This year, they had double the interceptions to touchdowns, 8 to 16. They doubled their passes defensed or pass breakups from last season. They had 20. Let me just look this up to make sure. I believe it was 24 last season. Yes, correct. 24 passes defense last season. They had 48 this year. So you just look at every rush defense got a lot better this year, Vince. Last year, the rush defense for Notre Dame ranked 37th in yards allowed per game at 131.3. They ranked 52nd in yards allowed per rush last season at 3.92. This season, the rush defense improved quite a bit. They jumped up to 28th in rush defense, and then also improved to 24th in yards allowed per attempt. Now, the one caveat there with the rush defense is they were at about like 128 to 129, somewhere around there, before the bowl game. And then they held Oregon State, to who was missing 3 linemen, at 2 yards.
2 yards. Yeah.
So that kind of skews it a little bit, but still it was improved.
It was
this
improved
season from last season. Third down defense was another one where you saw a big jump for Notre Dame this year. They ranked 30th this year, which was not great, but definitely improved. They were 49th a season ago in third down defense, and they also got better on third down as the year went on. Vince, I mean, they that was a weakness for them for a good chunk of the year.
Oh yeah,
and it got better and better. I mean, they give up over 40% in 4 games in their first 8 games of the season. Half the games were over 40%, and then they had another one at 38.5. In the last 5 games, 9.1, 33.3, 38.5, 31.3, and 11.1. So they were sub 40 in each of those games. So they finished again on a strong note, and not just in the bowl game. And then, one of the biggest changes I've ever seen. I've never seen a defense go from one of the worst in all of of football in a statistical category to literally one of the best.
They were the worst last year.
I mean, it was their red zone defense last year, Vince. They ranked 130th out of 131 teams in total red zone defense, and they ranked dead last in touchdown defense. They gave up 27 touchdowns on 34 red zone attempts last season. Then you jump to this year, and Notre Dame was 3rd nationally in red zone defense, total defense, and 3rd in red zone touchdown defense. Last year, 27 touchdowns on 32 attempts. This year, 14 touchdowns on 34 attempts.
Same amount of attempts.
Just like 2 more, actually.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
This year.
I thought you said 34. Okay.
Yeah, no, 34 this year, 32 last
32.
year.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. And 2 more this year. And they gave up 13 less touchdowns and improved overall in a lot of different areas. That was a humongous change. Like it's hard to go from that bad to that good in one season.
With a lot of the same personnel, by the way.
Yes.
I mean,
coaching wise, player wise, and the same number of attempts. Like you could look at last year and be like, hey, they had small number of attempts in the red zone. They didn't let a lot of red zone trips happen.
Sure.
They had that 1 or 2 bad games that kind of padded the number. No, they were bad in the red zone all year.
All year long.
You gave up 27 touchdowns on 32 attempts. And then take it to this year, and you give up 14 touchdowns on 34 attempts. And at least, I mean, there's a couple times I can just off the top of my head, Vince, remember them getting the ball in the red zone, like starting drives with the opponent having the ball in the red zone. And, I mean, it was a big part of the Ohio State game.
Yeah.
Ohio State got to the red zone 4 times, only scored twice because they had a big goal line stand. And then, of course, only scored 1 touchdown. They were 2 of 4 against Duke, 1 of 3 against Louisville, 1 of 2 against USC. I mean, they were stout in the red zone all season. And
huge difference.
That just, I mean, they set their minds to getting better, and they got a ton better.
Well, and that was clearly a point of emphasis. I know because we heard the coaches talking about that in the offseason. I mean, the red zone defense was a point of emphasis for Al Golden and his staff. And it's very clear and obvious that it was a point of emphasis, and they coached it up. And the players played better too. Don't get me wrong. Because remember last year, what was so frustrating is between the 20s, Notre Dame was a pretty really good defense last year. Right. And then they just fell apart in the red zone. Yeah. And then this year they continued to be stout between the 20s, but then they picked it up in the red zone when, it became important, obviously. Right. So,
and did it without sacrificing other areas, right? Like that's the thing is like they didn't just improve in that area, they improved everywhere. Because like sometimes you say, hey, we're going to get better at the red zone, but we focus so much on this area where we
Something
were
else fell
bad
off. Yeah.
that we were not as good on third down, or we
Right.
give up a lot more red zone trips because we're not as good in the run game, or whatever the case may be. And a lot of it was coaching last year. I mean, we would talk about this. It's like, what's your plan in the red zone? Like, what exactly are you trying to accomplish in the red zone? It was hard to understand sometimes what they did. And this year there was a very clear plan, and they stayed true to who they are. That's a big part of it. They didn't go away from, hey, we're going to be a different defense in the red zone. No, we're going to be true to who we are. And if anything, take more advantage of who we are in the red zone by being more aggressive with our coverages in the red zone, which then freed up resources to be more effective stopping the run in the red zone, which was a big part of it. I mean, they were better in the run game in the red zone. That was a big key to their success this season in the red zone. So, I mean, hats off to Al Washington, Chris O'Leary, Mike Mickens, Max Bulla, and of course Al Golden for the job they did on defense this year. Because, like you said, Vince, now they benefited from the fact that they did have just about everybody back.
Sure.
But the guys they lost were good football players. I mean, Isaiah Foskey was a second-round draft pick. Jason Adamiola was a multi-year starter. Justin Adamiola was a very productive player. I mean, they didn't lose. I mean, they lost some pretty good players from lose Chris Smith, who was a really nice pickup. Tariq Bracy was a big loss at the nickel position. So there were some key losses off of last year's defense too, but they did bring back a lot of experience this season, and Al Golden took full advantage of that.
Yeah,
no doubt about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could see these guys thriving under the program for a second season, for under this scheme for a second season, because it led to less thinking, more reacting, and which then turned into more explosive defensive plays. I mean, they were more explosive this year defensively than they were the year before. I mean, they weren't like a bend but don't break team last year, but this year they made plays. I don't know if there's a metric that really bears that out, but like I felt like last year there were a lot of plays left on the table.
Sure.
Defensively that they just didn't make. They were in the backfield, but they weren't making those plays. This year, it felt like they made those plays. They made those explosive plays in the backfield and on key downs.
What's funny, Vince, is that they did what they did this year, despite being worse when it comes to tackles for loss and sacks than they were last year. Like, that's the wild thing. But they did it in clutch moments. They made those plays, to your point. But they had 10 fewer tackles for loss this year than they had last year. Like, over the course of the whole season, they had 10 less tackles for loss. They had 7 fewer sacks this season than they had last season. But we've talked about this before. You can't always determine effectiveness by sacks. So if you look at Pro Football Focus, for example, they had Notre Dame last year on 845 plays. They had Notre Dame last season. Actually, that's this year's number of plays. Last year on 868 plays. So more plays than the defense was accounted for this year. They had the defense down for having 225 pressures, and then 84 sacks or hits, and then 312 stops, which is like stuffs, run game, pass game stuffs, right? Which they define that as, let me just find it so people understand this statistic: defensive stops, tackles that constitute a failure for the offense, right? So last year, 868 plays, 225 pressures, 84 of which were hits or sacks, and then 312 stops. This year, and then also more turnovers this year. 10 interceptions is 16 this season for the defense. You look at forced fumbles this season, Vince. They went from last year they had 5 fumble recoveries. This year they had 8. So last year they went from 15 turnovers to 24 turnovers, and then as I talked about in the other category, forced fumbles, they went from 8 last season to 18 this year. And then they went from 24 pass breakups to 48 pass breakups.
Yeah. That was a statistic we talked about going into the season.
Yeah.
How that had to get better.
It had to be more disruptive on the football.
Yep.
Well, then you look at the stats, so you saw that jump. Well, a big part of that jump, in my opinion, comes from being overall just more impactful. So on 845 plays, that's 21 fewer than last year. They had 266 total pressures, 88 hits or sacks on the quarterback, and then 332 stops. That's 20 more than last year. So 20 fewer plays. They had more pressures on the quarterback, more hits on the quarterback, and more stops this season. Twice as many passes defensed. Was it so 10 to 16 interceptions, 8 to what was it? What did I say the fumble number was last season? That's 5 to 8 this year. So 9 more turnovers, twice as many passes defensed. That's how you go from being a team that allowed actually a as good as the pass defense was the year before. One thing that was a little bit like, okay, they weren't great. They didn't force as many incompletions. They gave up a 58.7 completion rate last year. This year, it dropped all the way down to 52.4, which was second in all of college football. So it was just overall, Vince, a just far more disruptive defense, even though it was a defense that didn't get as much actual sacks and didn't quite get as many tackles for loss. In order to drop 50 yards off your yards per game and to go from, what did I say, like 5.1 yards per play
4.4
last season to 4.4, to do that while getting 10 fewer tackles for loss and 7 fewer sacks is a level of consistent dominance that to me really stands out for this defense.
I don't know if this is going to help my argument or our argument, but what is the missed tackles from last year to this year in comparison?
That's a good one. It's a good question. So last season, missed tackle numbers from Pro Football Focus, they had 99. And this season, they had 108. So more missed tackles.
That actually is shocking to me. Like I said, I didn't know if that stat was going to help us, but
here's the thing I'll say why I'm actually not.
Okay.
I think your point is still valid, because last year there was a lot of one guy missing tackles.
Okay.
And it was usually in space.
Yes.
They had some issues early this season tackling, in my opinion. Like early in the year, they had some issues. But a lot of the missed tackles this year were behind the line. It would be Riley Mills and then Howard Cross, or Howard Cross missing a guy, and then the guy steps away, and then he's getting hit by Javonte Jean-Baptiste.
And that counts, or he's like getting tackled near the line,
right?
Yeah, because
and they were disruptive misses.
Yeah,
and so like a guy would throw a ball away. You know, there were more things along those lines that you saw from them this year, because even though the numbers were higher, and again, that's it's a little bit debatable, but the numbers are comparable. But they were fewer of the open field missed tackles. Now, there were some big ones. I mean, you think of the Xavier Watts one against Ohio State. You think of DJ Brown against Louisville. There were still those moments. But a lot of the missed tackles this year were not as noticeable, because they were a guy would make a guy miss and then immediately get drilled by J.D. Bertrand or Xavier Watts, or you know what I mean? Like, it was just, there was much more of a swarming nature to the defense this year.
Yes.
And sometimes when that happens, you're going to have missed tackles. But because, hey, I'm the pursuit guy, I got to funnel this thing back inside, and then somebody's going to be there to clean it up. And so it was a different type of thing this season than it was last season.
Yes,
and
the swarming factor of this defense this year was so much better, I felt, than last year. I mean, there were just so many hats on the ball more often than not this year compared to last year, because you're right, there was a lot of one-on-one missed opportunities that turned into big plays
for 20-30 yards.
Right, turned into big plays, and that also factors into the 50 yards less per game. It factors into all of those different things, and I think that's pretty accurate too.
Well, I mean, you look at, like, for example, Vince, you talk about big plays. Last year Notre Dame gave up 49 plays of 20 yards or more. This year they only gave up 37. Last year Notre Dame, if you look at number of plays 30 yards or more, Notre Dame gave up 20 plays of 30 yards or more last season. This year it drops down to 17. So I mean, you had a defense that gave up fewer big plays, fewer chunk plays this season as well. Last year they gave up 9 plays of 40 yards or more. This year they gave up only 7. So last year they gave up 5 plays of 50 yards or more. This year was only 3. So you don't have as many of those plays. And then this year They give up one play of 60 yards or more, none of 70, none of 80. Last year, they gave up 3 plays of 60 yards or more, 2 of 70 and 1 of 80. So you just you didn't have as much of that this season.
Yeah.
And so, yes, that's still an area that needs to be improved, but it's not a bad number. It's not a terrible number. And it's a number that, again, when you look at it in context, I think tells a very interesting story about how good this team was, in my opinion, this season.
Yeah.
It was a very, very, very good defensive football team.
Yeah. Yes. And, in order to have a very good football team, a very good defensive football team, you need to have some stars, right? I mean, you need to have some breakouts, and there were definitely some breakouts this year. Obviously Xavier Watts ends up being a unanimous All-American. And I believe, was it you that told me that he's the first safety ever to be a unanimous All-American at the University of Notre Dame? Like that right there, that stat alone is mind-boggling to me that he's the first safety ever, which is amazing. And
they've had consensus All-Americans, including Kyle Hamilton in 2021, but never unanimous.
You never
meaning first team by everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, whoever didn't put Kyle Hamilton on the first team deserves to lose their job.
Well, no, he didn't deserve to. I mean, actually, I'll push back on it. The year that he was a consensus All-American, first of all, he didn't even play the whole season.
That's true. He did. Yeah, that's right.
And number two, we complained that whole year about how he kind of wasn't as good and impactful as the year before after some early play. So, no, I'll push back on that one a little bit. I thought he should have maybe been one in 2020.
Fair.
But no, not 2020. He didn't play the whole season. And again, Kyle Hamilton is a tremendous talent and has become apparently a really, really good NFL player. But when you miss as many games as he did and you have the inconsistency, I mean, just the Cincinnati game alone should have kept him from being a unanimous All-American that year.
That was bad. Yeah.
That
one play was so bad.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on that one. Now, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, right? I mean, he was a unanimous. He was dominant for an entire season, and that's really what it boils down to. And that's how Xavier Watts was.
And he was dominant the entire season
from start to finish.
Yes.
I mean, and the big thing, and he wasn't I thought there was just a level of raised play. I mean, Howard Cross had a breakout year. He became a big time player this year. I thought Riley Mills had a very good year. It would seem that a lot of Notre Dame fans don't understand that. I still have people saying, I just don't see it with Riley Mills. There's somebody on the message board talking about, I made the comment, I think the D-line next year could be elite, and there was a pushback on it, and I was surprised. And I'm like, they were elite this year, and pretty much everybody comes back. At three of the 4 positions, your entire depth chart comes back.
Right.
And it's like, and they were elite this year, in my opinion. And part of the reason that people don't view the D-line as elite is because there's an obsession with sacks. Well, they have a lot of sacks. I don't care. They played elite football. That's what matters. However it manifests itself. And so when I look at it, Vince, you had Howard Cross breaking out as a star, second team All-American by if there was such thing as a unanimous second team All-American, it would have been Howard Cross. You know what I mean?
Right.
In the season he had, obviously Cam Hart was a breakout star for Notre Dame this year. Didn't get the postseason recognition for it, but he was a star this year.
Yes, he was.
And then of course Xavier Watts. And all those guys kind of flashed it early. That was a big part of it, is they flashed it early. You kind of saw early in September, okay, Howard Cross is a different dude this year. Xavier Watts is who we hope he could become, because we talked about in the offseason, like Xavier has a chance to be a star, but he's still learning and he's got a lot to prove. He's got a chance to be that guy at safety, with some guys gone, and he's going to get more chances this year than he did last year. But can he become that player? And of course, he did.
He did.
And that was a big part of it too, is, there weren't any weaknesses on this year's defense. Even Jordan Botelho, as bad as he wasn't a weakness. He just wasn't good enough.
Right.
There wasn't like that weak spot, but they were just good everywhere and great at some key positions. And it was the epitome of a great team defense. I watch other teams, and there's other teams that have more NFL players on their defense, but not many played as well as Notre Dame's did week after week after week against a pretty good schedule. And huge hats off to Al Golden. Look, we gave him a lot of flack last year, deservedly so. We gave Al Washington a lot of flack last year, deservedly so. And those two guys, to me, for the things that they were responsible for, I thought did excellent jobs this season.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a level of consistency from the Notre Dame defensive line that you needed to have for this defense to thrive, because they're not elite at linebacker, because they're not elite at safety opposite Xavier Watts, who's more of a space player. You can't have the defense they had this year if your defensive line isn't outstanding.
Right.
And Al Washington gets a ton of credit for that. For the development of that group, despite losing 2 starters, one of your key reserves. It was a really impressive performance we saw from the defensive line this year. And like I said, way more disruptive overall, breakout players. It was just an overall, we knew one thing we did say before the year, we thought this defense could be pretty good. That's the argument we had. Yes, we agree that they didn't do a good job last year, but here's why we think this defense has a chance to be better this season. And they were a lot better.
Yeah. Well,
and hats off to this coaching staff and the players for making that happen.
Well, and I thought one of the things that I really liked about Al Golden, and it ties into the defensive line piece as well, is I don't think early on he used the defensive line in a way that was going to allow them to be elite. But then he realized, I just got to let these guys play. Like, let these guys go out and make plays and let these guys go out and do. And once he did that, it was a catalyst for the rest of the defense as well. And it allowed Al Golden to do different things, with the linebackers and bringing some pressures from some different places, and, allowed for some corner fires at good times, and, did all of those different things because he's like, you know what? I've got an elite defensive line here. I just need to let them go make plays. I don't have to manufacture pressures with this defensive line. Because as a defensive coordinator, sometimes that's what you've got to do because you're not getting the production from a defensive line that you need to. So you need to manufacture some certain things and do some different things to get them loose and allow them to go play. He's like, look, I don't need to do that. I can just let these guys go and play and then kind of do some stuff in the back to emphasize what's happening up front. And once that took place around, what was it, game 4 or 5 in that neighborhood, like the defense just took another step and went to another level as a whole group. And look, it takes a lot for a coordinator to realize, hey, my initial plan, it's good, but it can be better. Well, and that's what he did, in my opinion.
And I'm curious how much of that was him adjusting his plan or his plan adjusting based on what he saw from his team. Because I think
that, it was that. Yeah, I think he saw what he had, and he's like, I can just go with this.
Right. Hey, I have a defense this year that's capable of taking over games.
Yes.
Where maybe the year before, maybe they didn't have as much of that. And I think that's part of it as well. I'm actually looking something up here real quick because I'm very curious about something. A number statistic this year compared to last year that I think is going to be interesting to.
But don't you think there's some coaches out there though that are like, no, I'm sticking with this because I know this will work or whatever. And he saw what he had in front of him and what they were doing and kind of altered the path a little bit.
It's to me, Vince, it's kind of. I don't know that the path was necessarily altered as much, and this is why I'm actually looking this up, because I had a feeling this was going to be the case. So if you actually look at the numbers, so according to Pro Football Focus, last year in 2022, Maris Leofau blitzed 112 times, J.D. Bertrand blitzed 90, and Jack Kaiser blitzed 31. This year, Maris Leofau blitzed 130 times. J.D. Bertrand blitzed 108 times. Jack Kaiser blitzed 39 times. And Jalen Sneed blitzed 83 times. So you actually saw more what they considered pass rushes from the linebackers this season compared to last year. Now, what were the reasons for that? I mean, they still brought pressure. That's number one. But, you look at the numbers. And this year, the opponents passed 372 times. Last year, they passed 395 times. So it's on fewer pass plays. So I think what happened this year is there was less of the all-out blitzing than we saw last year, in my opinion. I think that's part of it. I think other factors that kind of go into this too, Vince, are This season, you saw the defense, I thought, be more I'm trying to think of the way to describe it to make sense to you, because I'm agreeing with you, but I'm pointing out how I just felt there was more purpose to what they did this year.
Okay.
So I think the blitzes they didn't look like they did as much because there wasn't as many noticeable. They're bringing this many and it's not getting
Right.
home.
Sure.
And so I think there was a level of effectiveness to this year's pressure packages that maybe wasn't there last season, and so all those things to me factor into why it's not so much that they did something less; it just was better than it was the year before. And so I gave you the numbers about. Let me find, where's Marist. Give me 1 second. So last year, for example, I talked about how when you look at Marist Liufau blitzed 18 more times this year than he did last year, but he had 15 more quarterback hurries this year than he did last year. Went from 11 to 26. J.D. Bertrand had 18 more pressures this year than he did last year. I mean, like pass rushes.
Right.
But he had 16 more pressures than he did last season.
This is more productive.
Correct. And that to me is the big thing. Last year, Jack Kaiser had 6 total pressures on the quarterback. This year on 39 pressures, that was on 31 pressures. He had 6 on 31. This year on 39 pressures, he had 12. So JD and Jack doubled their pressure numbers. Marist over doubled it. Right. So I think it was just so much more effective this year. And that was a big part of kind of what went into it. And a big part of that was the effectiveness of the defensive line. And so when the defensive line is more effective and getting more penetration, I don't think we necessarily recognize just how much they blitzed the linebackers, because they were kind of getting, like, it was just all one group of getting in pressure on the quarterback.
Right.
And a lot of the pressures they brought this year were kind of delayed pressures as well. They did a better job with delayed blitzes.
The timing was so much better this year than it was last year.
That is because of the D-line. A delayed blitz doesn't work if the D-line's not getting penetration.
Sure.
And so there was a lot more of those delayed pressures that would then get to the quarterback.
Right.
So just overall play of the linebackers was so much better that it masked that they actually blitzed more this year than they did last year. What I felt like, and this is purely gut feel, not analysis. It felt like they did less of the all-out blitzing this year.
Yeah, right.
Than last year.
Agreed.
Agreed. Again, I could be wrong on that, but that's just a gut feeling that I had about this defense. So there was a lot of things that we saw that were different this year, Vince.
Sure.
But but Al Golden didn't go away from who he was.
Right.
I think he realized we have a much more effective defensive line. Let's turn them loose.
Yes.
And let's let them go.
That's for sure. You talk about the all-out blitzes and things like that. I felt like at times last year he was blitzing because he was trying to make something happen.
You said it earlier. Manufacture.
Yes.
They had to manufacture pass rush. Agreed.
Correct. Because they weren't getting it. And now this year they were blitzing, and it was in a timely fashion.
Right.
Like, hey, we're going to heat this kid up because I know we can. Right. It's not like, oh crap, we're not getting any pressure on him. We need to send somebody. Like it was a different feeling.
Yeah, they were blitzing because they wanted to, not because they had to.
Yeah, exactly.
I've said this a million times, which is why it was more when you blitz because you want to, not because you have to, you're going to be more effective.
Yes. 100%.
And that's what happened. And I also thought they did a much better job this year. Al Golden, Max Bulla deserve a lot of credit for this as well as coaches. I thought the run stunts that turned into pass rushes was way more effective this year. So basically, the way you coach a linebacker is if he's run stunting, hey, we're eating gaps, but it's a pass, you've got to keep working through to get to the quarterback. They were much better about that. I thought there were times it wasn't quite as good as other times, but they did a better job, in my opinion, of not making themselves so blockable. This year.
Yeah.
They were much better at taking angles to get by. Their block destruction technique was much better. And we'll get into this a little bit more in the what went right category, but just just overall, Vince, this was such a better coached football team this
Right.
season than it was last year. But it wasn't Al Golden going away from who he is or what he believes. It just was they were so much better at it, which is something we should have expected in year 2. But even with that expectation, the jump they made was even better than I thought it was going to be.
Yes.
To be honest with you.
Yeah. Nope, absolutely.
Can I say one more storyline this year that was a big difference?
Do it.
Outside of the Ohio State game, this team was much better at getting the stops late in games they could not get last year.
There were so many late drives last year that were so frustrating.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you
frustrating.
folded in the second half against Ohio State. You gave up the late drives against Marshall. You let North Carolina get back in the game. You let BYU get back in the game.
Yeah.
You let Stanford get a late scoring drive after you took a fourth quarter lead. You did that against USC. They kept responding in the second half. There were so many times they struggled to put Syracuse away in the second half. They were such a better team this year in regard to making those money stops.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of the Duke game, like Duke took that lead 14-13 in the fourth quarter, but I believe Duke had 2 drives after that Notre Dame stopped them, including the last stop. Like if they don't make that last stop, Duke had a chance to not give the ball back.
Right.
Notre Dame had to come up with a key third down stop for the offense to even get the ball back, and they did that. I mean, the Clemson game didn't turn out how you hoped, but the Notre Dame offense had the ball 6 times in the second half with a chance to tie the football game. And the only reason it was even close enough to tie is because of the pick from Xavier Watts that set up the offensive touchdown.
Right.
But your defense had to make all those stops to give your offense a chance to make those plays. And obviously the Louisville game didn't work out the way you want, but that to me was more the offense just putting the defense in terrible spots with going for it on 4th and long from your own, 30 or whatever. Those type of things were disappointing. But overall this year, I thought they did a much better job of getting the money stops that they needed to get to allow the offense to really put teams away the way that they did that we talked about the other day. I mean, NC State, that's a 24-17 game. Just like that changes, not because the offense was playing, like world beaters. It's because the defense gave them 3 possessions on short fields from turnovers, and so because you had DJ Brown made an interception and that gave them a short field that I'm just going to try to refresh my memory on this one, Vince. So just give me a second.
Nope,
so fourth quarter, Notre Dame scores 24 points in the fourth quarter. Those drives came on a 33-yard touchdown drive, a 16-yard touchdown drive within 5 minutes of the fourth quarter. So going into the fourth quarter, NC State had just scored to make it 24-17. Notre Dame offensively gives the ball back after that. They fumbled on the next drive and gave NC State a short field. The defense forced a punt or a missed field goal. The offense went 3 and out and punted. The defense gets the ball back and they have an interception. That was the one by DJ Brown, I believe. That was the one by Xavier Watts. That sets it up. They go up 31-17. Very next drive, DJ Brown gets the interception that gives them a much shorter field, 16-yard drive. Just like that, it's 38-17. Not because the offense was playing great. They had fumbled. They had gone 3 and out with it being a 7-point game. The defense stepped up in the fourth quarter, unlike last year, and made those money plays. And next thing you know, a 24-17 game to start the fourth quarter is 45-17 like that because the defense kept giving you the ball back on short fields. It was plays like that, Vince, that really were the difference between the biggest difference for me as far as how the impact. All those other statistics are great. Those things are all fine, and it's fun to look at statistics. But it's about do you make plays in money situations? Right. That you can be not good in money situations and still put up really good numbers. I care more about the guys that make the money plays. And this defense this year made money plays. The defense, how many times they gave the offense short fields against USC to help. I mean, the 24-6 blowout lead at halftime against USC was because the defense kept giving the offense short fields because of forcing turnovers. Right. They made so many more money plays this season. And it was D-line, linebacker, DB. It was across the board. That was probably the most impressive thing to me about the defense this year.
But wasn't that the most disappointing thing about last year's defense?
Yeah.
Because they did have good numbers, but their performance in the red zone and their performance late in games made them not an elite defense. I mean, just based on that alone, because of the lack of money plays, right? And they were able to do so much better in that category. It's not perfect yet. It's not perfect yet. They still need to make some more money plays. It's in some more, the Ohio State game, whatever. Okay. Yes, they do still need to do that, but they stepped up big time in that category. And that was a big weakness for them last year. That was a glaring weakness for them. Again, they were borderline elite between the 20s. But then when it came to inside the red zone and then final drives,
fourth quarter,
that was tough.
Yep.
That was really, really tough. So big strides in that regard this year. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
All right, that's our overview of the defense. Hang tight because we've got more coming. But in the meantime, make sure you hit that like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell, share with your family and friends, and jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. All kinds of good stuff over there as well. All right, Brian, let's talk about defensively what went right. And we talked about a lot that went right in the last segment, but let's get specific.
Let's do why.
Right. Yeah.
Let's do why.
Exactly.
Why it went right. So we talked about how everything was better and all these things were effective and all that. So let's talk about why it was so much better. Besides just like the superficial, like better coaching, which there was better coaching this year.
Sure.
But get into the specifics of what on the field allowed them to do that. And the first thing you have to look at is just the elite secondary and pass defense that they had.
So good.
I mean, when you have corners like Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison and Thomas Harper, and one of the things that went right this year, we'll just say it here, is you hit on your transfers on defense. And it wasn't a lot. I mean, you got 3, 2 of them were absolute hits. Thomas Harper was a big hit, Javonte Jean-Baptiste. But it all starts with a secondary that can just lock people down.
Yes.
And when you have corners that can do the things that Notre Dame's corners did this season, it's like, boy, it's so much easier to be dominant when you're playing that effectively. It really is. And you're talking about Benjamin Morrison wasn't even your best corner this year. I mean, think about that. And they were just lights out this year as a secondary, and that was a big part of it. You could just kind of go out there and play man defense, press man defense more often than not, and just completely put the clamps on people, and that allowed a lot of what Al Golden wanted to do.
Yes,
and then when you're bringing in, here's the other part too that's can be overlooked. You look at it and say, hey, man, you can play Jaden Mickey as much as they did, and you can play Christian Gray as much as they did, and they're even more effective as far as just a pure percentage standpoint. Because so Benjamin Morrison allowed a 59% completion percentage this year. Cam Hart was 53.6, and that number is way too high because Pro Football Focus gives a lot of no cover zone completions. So if they catch a screen behind the line, they count that as a catch on Cam Hart. It is what it is. But there's consistency to it. They do that with everybody. And so but that's, it's still a pretty good number especially when you look at what they gave up as far as, they gave up, not a lot of yards per catch and different things like that. And not a lot of yards after catch, at least Cam Hart didn't. The numbers were overall pretty flipping good. But then you look at Jaden Mickey allowed 9 completions on 20 attempts. And Christian Gray allowed 7 completions on 19 attempts. So they were, as a unit, they were below 50% throwing on corners this year as a unit. That's a really good statistic. Really good statistic. And so, you look at Ohio State, for example, who had one of the best pass defenses in college football. And I'm using Ohio State as an example because of how good they were, because they were one of the teams that ranked near Notre Dame this season in pass defense. Their 2 corners were similar to where Notre Dame's are at 50.7 and 52.1, but they gave up 61 completions. Their 2 cornerbacks did. Notre Dame's 2 cornerbacks gave up 40 this season. And so Ohio State starting cornerbacks gave up 353 yards and 277 yards. Notre Dame starting corners gave up 279, and Cam Hart only gave up 137 passing yards the entire season.
Wow.
In 12 games. And then Jordan Hancock was kind of a rotation corner. He played a lot of corner as well. He gave up 25 completions for 45 on 45 targets for 267 yards. Jaden Mickey and Christian Gray combined gave up 224 receiving yards. So Ohio State had an elite secondary this year. They had an elite pass defense this year. And then you just look at the numbers for the corners, and you just realize how good Notre Dame's corners were this season.
Yeah.
And they were excellent. They were absolutely excellent this season.
Yeah, I kind of liken, defensively, if you've got lockdown corners and you've got guys that can play man and, that kind of a deal as a play caller, obviously it opens up so much more that you can do with your front seven. And I liken it to the offensive side of the ball is if you've got like an offensive line that is just dominating everybody, you can call whatever you want. You know what I mean? Like you can run the ball, you can do this, it just opens up everything. That's how it is defensively, but with corners and the secondary. If you can lock down outside, you can call whatever you want on the inside, and it's going to make you look pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it does. I mean, look, if you can't be a man defense,
right,
that allows the box to focus on shutting down the run and getting pressures on the quarterback, if you can't lock people down in man coverage.
Right.
And they absolutely did that.
Yeah.
And of course the corners were good. Thomas Harper was really good this season. I thought Thomas had a really good season, but the breakout from Xavier Watts helped a bunch as well.
Oh yeah.
I mean, he was really good this season as well.
Patrolling center field, being able to come down and make plays, and he was just a ball hawk. I mean, he was around the football this year. A lot of that is attributed to the fact that he actually got to play the same position 2 years in a row.
I know, right?
And we've been begging for that. You and I were calling for him to play offense, obviously early on in his career. And if he would have stuck to offense, maybe he's a breakout wide receiver. But I think he found his home. Obviously, at safety.
Well, I think Xavier Watts would have done what he did this year wherever he played. That was always my yes, I would think on it, but he's going to be a dude. He just needs an opportunity. Right. But here's another thing too, Vince, is we talk a lot about the obvious: Benjamin Morrison, Cam Hart, Xavier Watts, but a guy whose final season is probably going to get remembered for a mistake that he made unfairly is DJ Brown.
Right.
Because he had the big missed tackle against Louisville, and then he had to drop the interception against Ohio State. And that's a bummer because it masks how much better he was this season. He was such a solid part of that defense. And if you look at the numbers this season, last year, for example, DJ had 12 missed tackles. This year only had 7. Last year, DJ gave up 15 completions on 22 attempts for 144 yards. The year before that, he gave up 11 completions on 16 attempts for 116 yards. That's a 68-plus completion percentage allowed both years. And he gave up 3 touchdowns in those 2 years. This year, DJ Brown did not allow a single touchdown pass all year. He only allowed 10 completions all year on 26 targets. Teams only had a 38.5% completion rate against him. He only allowed 85 yards passing all season on the back end of the defense. So DJ Brown stepping up and having a really good final season was sort of that final piece to where there was no weakness in the secondary. Yeah. There was nobody to target when the starters were in the game. Now, there were some guys teams would go after off the bench. Clarence Lewis, when he came in, they'd go after him. Ramon Henderson, when he came in off the bench, they'd go after him. That's exactly who Ohio State targeted. It was DJ to the right and Ramon Henderson to the left, and they went right after Ramon. And so those guys weren't quite as effective this season off the bench. So the depth wasn't quite as good. But you're starting secondary, and this is why I've contended. There are other teams that belong in the conversation. I'm not going to sit there and say it's not arguable, but for me, having broken these teams down all year, there was not a better secondary in college football this year than Notre Dame's. There are secondaries with better NFL prospects, but there wasn't a better secondary, especially when you consider that Notre Dame – could you imagine what Notre Dame would have done this year if they would have got to play against the Big Ten passing offenses all year. Think about that. So that says a lot.
Well, and when you consider the depth as well, when you're talking about bringing in Mickey and Gray, and I mean, it across the board and then down deep. This is one heck of a secondary for Notre Dame.
So you talk about what went right. You can't be as good as you were on defense this year without the secondary being as good as it was. And huge props to Chris O'Leary and Mike Mickens. Because obviously we talk a lot about Coach Mickens, deservedly so. He's arguably the best cornerbacks coach in college football right now.
Absolutely.
But Chris O'Leary, for all the crap I give him, deservedly as a recruiter, the one thing we've never questioned, this guy can coach.
Oh yeah,
he's got to do a better job recruiting. But this guy can coach. He can flat out coach, and there's no doubt about that. So just and guys have to step up. DJ Brown, you can coach him all you want, but he's got to step up and make plays, and he did. Right. You know what I mean? Again, I know we're all going to focus on that one play against Ohio State. I get it. But that one play doesn't erase everything else he did this year.
Right.
That's the foundation of it, in my opinion. And that leads to number 2, Vince. Number 1, success leads to point number 2, success, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about the defensive line making a jump, I assume. Yeah.
Yep.
So, the defensive line, again, I'll say it again. When you've got the secondary that you've got at Notre Dame, it allows the defensive line to do what they need to do as well, because they can just pin their ears back and come after guys. They can come after the quarterback. They can come after the run game. They can, make pressures. They can disrupt what other teams want to do. And that's what Notre Dame did the best this year, was they just disrupted what offensive teams wanted to do against them. And again, yes, sack numbers are important, but they're not the be all end all. They didn't get a ton of sacks, but they disrupted these teams. They were in the backfield. They were causing, running backs to try to, pop something outside because there was nothing in the middle. Quarterbacks were having to scramble because Notre Dame was there giving pressure. They were forcing offenses off of what they wanted to do. And that's what you want from your defensive line. This defensive line, because you're right, they lost, Isaiah Foskey's second-round draft pick, like a stud, right? I mean, set the sack record at Notre Dame. You lose that kind of, momentum, that kind of statistic, that's major. And Notre Dame didn't miss a beat. They didn't miss a beat as a unit. They didn't miss a beat. And a lot of that, credit obviously goes to the transfer from Ohio State, Javonte Jean-Baptiste. I thought, certainly. We talked about the fact that Notre Dame hit home runs on those two guys, Harper and JJB. There's no doubt about it. JJB, for me, is by far the best transfer that they brought in, and what he was able to bring at the end. Like, looking back, it's like, wow, I was pleasantly surprised with what he was able to bring to the table. I thought he was going to be a nice depth piece. Was he even going to, like, when he came in, was like, is he going to start? Like, I'm not sure if he's even going to start. Like,
play Vipers, he's going to play, like, he's probably more of a Viper, but they're going to ask him to play field end. And
he stepped up his run game defense and just his disruptiveness and then the off the field stuff. I mean, you could just tell that he was bought into what Notre Dame was wanting to do and all of that. And so, that's obviously a big
but
piece.
Also still stayed true to, you could see some of the comments he'd make about Ohio State.
Sure.
And you kind of like that. Like, he didn't leave Ohio State with any ill will. Like, there was still love for that program and those players. And then he comes here.
I think it was both ways, though, too. Like, you heard Ohio State people talking very positively about him when he came over to Notre Dame. They're like,
I think they were surprised how good he was as well.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
But when I look at the D-line just as a whole, I mean, you talk about how important it was to get Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Just for comparison's sake, Isaiah Foskey led the defense in 2022 with 33 pressures, according to Pro Football Focus. He had 33 pressures and 26 stops. He had 15 total sacks and hits on the quarterback on 311 pass rushes. This year, Javonte Jean-Baptiste in 306 pass rushes, so 4 fewer, had 37 pressures, 4 more, 14 hits on the quarterback, so that was 1 less than Foskey, and he had 28 stops this season. So he was more productive at that position than Foskey was at Viper, And the Viper is designed to be more of a productive position. That's the point.
Sure.
And so the end jump that was this year was huge, but it wasn't just him. I mean, last year,
right,
your number one, this is according to Pro Football Focus, your top 5 guys in pressures last year. Foskey was number 1 with 33. Jason Adamiola was 2 with 25. Justin Adamiola was 3 with 24. Riley Mills was 4th with 23. And Howard Cross was 5th at 21. You look at this season. Here's your top 5 this season. Howard Cross had 40. Javonte Jean-Baptiste had 37. J.D. Bertrand had 31 pressures this year. Riley Mills had 29 pressures this year. And Maris Leofau had 26 pressures this year. So last year, and J.D. Bertrand had 11 hits on the quarterback, and Marist had 9. Jalen Seed had 4. Jack Kaiser had 4. That's a lot of linebackers getting hits on the quarterback.
That's havoc. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's that disruption that you're talking about. But, last year, your number 2 guy in pressures last year had 25. This year, that guy would have been 6th in pressures. Your number 1 guy last year would be 3rd this year.
Right.
And so those are things that you look at. Like last year, they had 38 total hits on the quarterback and 46 sacks. This year, the sack numbers, according to Pro Football Focus, were only 38, but they had 50 hits on the quarterback. So a lot more disruptive this season compared to last season. Last year, they had 2 broken. This is a big one. Last year, they had 2 batted balls that are batted at the line of scrimmage. 2. This year, they had 9. So it's just an overall level of disruption that comes from the defensive line, and it wasn't just Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Last year, you're starting 2 interior guys. Howard Cross. Let's just take your top 4. Last year, your primary interior rotation. Actually, Riley Mills is an edge player. Yeah, Jason Adamiola had 25 pressures and 8 total hits on the quarterback. Howard Cross was your other starter. He had 21 pressures, 7 hits on the quarterback. And then your next best guy, Gabriel Rubio, had 7 pressures. Chris Smith had – where's Chris Smith? He had 2. Not a lot of disruption from the middle. This year, you're starting 2 interior guys. Howard Cross had 40 pressures, 9 hits on the quarterback. Riley Mills had 29 pressures, 10 total hits, sacks plus hits on the quarterback. So you had and then Jason Onye had 8 and a lot fewer snaps. Gabriel Rubio had 7 this year on only 68 pass rushes. Last year, Gabriel Rubio had 7 on 102 pass rushes. So he was even more effective. He just didn't play as much because he missed 4 games with injuries. So way more disruptive up the middle. I mean, let's just do the math. Last year, top 2 interior pass rushers, Jason Adamiola, Howard Cross, had 46 combined pressures. This year, Howard Cross by himself
had 40.
Yeah. And they had 69 between your top 2.
Yeah.
Last year, your interior guys had similar numbers. You had 8 and 7. That's 15 total hits on the quarterback. This year, you had 10. You had 19. So just overall, more disruption from your defensive line this year, especially right up the middle.
Yeah.
And that is a huge part of it. When you can be a team that can get pressure on the quarterback right up the middle, that's a big part of it. And then you look at run stops, or just like you had 33 from Howard Cross this year, 27 from Riley Mills. That's 60. Last year, your top 2 guys had 21 and 13. That's 34 stops. Like the interior, Javonte Jean-Baptiste was huge. Nana Osafo-Mensah had a really good season as the number 2 off the bench. But the big jump on defensive line is right there. It was right up the middle. They were so much more disruptive up the middle. Again, guys, do the math. It's simple. Top 2 pass rushers up the middle last year, 46 pressures. Top 2 pass rushers up the middle this year, 69 pressures. Last year, top 2 middle guys had 34 total stops. This year, your top 2 guys had 60 total stops, according to Pro Football Focus. That is such an insanely greater level of just disruptive production right up the middle. And Vincent, you and I have been saying this since people have been hearing us on the show. If you can be great up the middle, you can be great on defense.
That's right.
This defense was elite. Yes, they had an All-American safety. Yes, they had great corners. Yes, their linebackers are much better, and we'll get into that. But the biggest jump was they were dominant right up the middle of the defense.
Yep.
And that is a big reason why this defense was so good this year. And the fact that both of them are coming back, the whole depth chart up the middle is coming back next year is really exciting. But we'll get to what's next. But like that was the biggest reason for the improvement this year was the play of the interior and the decision to move Riley Mills inside. The way, but that's where you say Al Washington did his best work, was doing what he did with Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Sure. But also getting the production they got from the middle of the defense was huge.
And to get those two guys to come back. Like that was a recruiting haul all in its own, in my opinion. Convincing those guys to come back for another year, which I think is huge, obviously moving into next year. But I was waiting to say how important it is to be dominant up the middle. Because, obviously I was a baseball coach. I was a football coach. Like being dominant up the middle defensively, where do you put your best players on the baseball field?
Shortstop, center field.
100%. Like that's where you put your best players. And in football, it's no different. You put them up the middle on the line. You put them in middle linebacker. You put them at safety. Like boom, boom, boom. Where are your best players, right? And you have to be strong there. And Notre Dame was strong there and so strong up the middle, up front, which was so, so important. Those two kids made such a huge stride from last year to this year. And I can only imagine the bar is going to be set pretty stinking high for 24 with these two guys coming back as well. I'm super excited about what the future holds, but we're talking about 23 and they anchored this defense. And again, yes, you had lockdown in the past game and it allowed these guys to play. It allowed these guys to do that. There's no doubt about it, but they did it. And that's the most important part. They did it and it was super effective.
Yeah.
And then that allowed for our next point of what went well was
part of it
was linebacker play, was consistent linebacker play. And you gave some numbers, in the last segment, we talked about linebacker play and what they were able to do and the pressures that they were able to have at the linebacker position, but they were so much more consistent at linebacker this year than they were last year. And it's the same guys. I mean, it's the same guys from last year to this year. So, I mean, it's very easy to compare because we're talking about the same kids, right? And so many times last year, and I would be sitting next to you in the press box or sitting next to you watching the game or whatever the case may be. It's like, why are they just taking on these blocks?
Right.
Straight on, like not, just straight on, shoulder to shoulder. Like, why is this happening? And all three guys did it. And it was super frustrating. They shed that problem for the most part this year.
Yeah.
And it showed. I mean, it showed. And there was also, and we talked about this in the first segment, to me, there was a lot less thinking going on. There was a lot less, paralysis by analysis, however you want to phrase it, right? They were just instinctively now making plays and fundamentally doing a better job of it coming downhill and making those plays in space too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a big part of it, Vince, is J.D. Bertrand was a slightly steadier version of himself this year. Sure. He was but he was not the problem last year. It was the other linebacker spot.
For sure. I mean, he led the team in tackles for the third time in 3 years. I mean, he was
in two different positions. Right. He's been productive. But what it really comes down to me is how much more productive the other two linebackers were. That was a big one for me. And I've talked about this with Maris was so much better this year than he was last year.
No doubt.
He's so much better this year than he was last year. But so another guy that just continues to get underappreciated. It's kind of like there can be an overhyping of him by some people, but then there's just this utter dismissal and that's Jack Kaiser. When used effectively, Jack Kaiser's really good. And I felt this year they found that sweet spot for Jack Kaiser. And he was a lot more effective. I mean, I talked about this, Vince. You look at he twice as many hits on the quarterback this year on his pressures. He went from 6 to 12, 8 more total pressures this season. He had 24 run stops in 2022. He had 29 this year. And so he was another guy. Just the overall level of play this season from the linebackers was really, really impressive. And when you look at the numbers, the crazy thing is, so JD, when you look at JD Bertrand, his stats, he had his total number of snaps. I'm actually looking for it this year. He played a lot more snaps this year than he did last year because of not missing time and stuff.
Yeah.
And they didn't rotate the mic a lot. But when you look at Maris and you look at his jump in production this year, as I said, he went from 11 total pressures to 26. He went from 1 hit on the quarterback last year. One time Maris Leofau got to the quarterback last year.
Wow.
Once.
Wow.
This year he had 9.
Jeez.
Right? But here's the thing about that, Vince. Last year he played, and then also stops. This year he had 22. Last year he had 17. That's a jump of 5 too. But here's the kicker. Last year, Maris played 646 snaps.
The most of anybody, wasn't it, on the defensive side of the ball?
This year only played 595. So he did all that in 50 fewer snaps than he did last. That's a whole game. He didn't play last game, right? So when you look at it, it was a jump in production, but it wasn't a jump in volume. I mean, last year, Jack Kaiser played 338 snaps. This year, Jack Kaiser played 354. It's about the same, and so the production jump did not come from they played a lot more snaps jump. It was just they played better football.
Right.
They were more effective football players. And one of the areas that I really felt like, Vince, is just like you talk about it, was just the ability for your linebackers to get home more.
Right.
When they pressure was huge, because that's just who Al Golden is. We can like it, not like it, whatever, but that's who he is. He's going to have his linebackers come. So if you're going to do that, you better get better at it. And this year, they got a lot better at it.
Right. Yes, they did. They got a lot better at it. And it was clinic tape at times to see the linebackers coming downhill, finding the gaps and getting in the backfield and making plays. I mean, it was, and there was just so many more times of that this year than there were last year. Just so many more times. And look, again, JD Bertrand played JD Bertrand football. He's consistent. He's whatever, but he was still more consistent this year than he was last year. Even though he led the team in tackles, he was still more consistent this year, still made more plays this year than he did last year. And then you talk about the other two guys as well, and it just it jumps off the page at you. I mean, it really does. The jump in production just jumps off the page.
Well, and here's one more area where they got a lot better too, Vince, is pass defense. Not just in pressures, but here's the other thing. Last year, JD Bertrand gave up 20 completions. This year, only gave up 12. Last year, gave up 175 passing yards. This year, only gave up 123. Maris was about the same, 9 completions versus 10, 40 yards versus 62, about the same. Jack Kaiser last year gave up 15 completions on 17 targets for 151 yards. This year, he only gave up 9 completions on 11 targets for only 84 yards. So they were able to find ways to protect them a little bit more in the pass game, but just overall, they were also more effective in the pass game, in coverage as well. So just across the board, Vince, this group was just a whole lot better than they were last year.
No doubt about it. And then finally, what went well, and we touched on it in the first segment, but the biggest thing that went well was red zone. The red zone defense. I mean, night and day difference. I mean, you gave the numbers in the first segment. We can do it again, going from a 130 and 131 in the 2 red zone categories to number 3.
In both.
I mean, you want to talk about worst to first, that kind of a deal. It doesn't get much better than that as far as a jump in production in the red zone, because that was one of the 2 biggest areas, in my opinion, that this defense had to get better. It was red zone and end of game, execution. And the red zone was by far the first.
And we knew they were going to be better because you couldn't be worse.
Right.
I mean, if they'd have jumped up to number 120, that's an improvement.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it couldn't have been, it could have been worse because there's like 2 more teams now this year. So they could have gone from 131 to like 133, I guess.
Sure.
I guess could have been worse. But in reality, it couldn't have been worse. But to not just get better because of how bad you were, but to make it a strength was just impressive.
Yes.
It was really, really impressive.
Right.
And
And it was a
Man,
concerted
yeah.
effort across the board, coaching, execution, all of it. I mean, it almost felt like towards the end of the season last year when teams would get in the red zone, it was just like, oh, here we go again. I mean, even from the players' body language, it was just like, well, we're in the red zone. I don't know what we don't know what to do here. Yeah, you could just see it. You could just see it. And there was a look of confidence this year when teams would get into the red zone that was just night and day difference. It just was just night and day difference. So that's a big one. That's a big one as far as what went right. No doubt.
Yeah. I mean, like that alone could have changed so much about this year's season. I mean, just, you talk about one of the things that I thought went right this year too, Vince, was they played so many more guys this season, I felt. But a big part of that was because you did what you needed to do early to put teams away. It allowed you to do that. It allowed you to play more guys. And so I could be wrong on that, but it just felt like they played a lot more guys this season.
I agree. And it was they obviously had confidence in their depth chart this year. And so they were able to rotate some more guys. They weren't just doing it to do it. I don't feel like the level of play dropped off when they brought certain guys in. And I also think that those guys that they brought in, they played to their strengths. And I'll give a for example, right? When Jalen Sneed was in the game, they played to his strength.
Eventually.
Eventually. Getting after the quarterback, coming downhill, making athletic plays, things like that. It wasn't, hey, we're going to sit him in the middle and have him diagnose plays. They had him using his athletic ability to his advantage and to Notre Dame's advantage. And they especially did that in the bowl game. And I believe you gave some numbers in the first segment about how his numbers increased from last year to this year. And it was an exponential growth kind of a situation. So,
yeah, it was fun to watch.
It was.
Wasn't perfect.
No.
But it's pretty good.
Yeah,
that leads us to the next point, Vince. What went wrong? And there's not a lot. We don't need to spend a lot of time on this. I do think the pass rush needs to be more consistent. I think that I wouldn't say that it went wrong, but if you want to look for some areas where this team wasn't as good, they've got to be more effective. There's still there's still plenty of room for improvement when it comes to getting after the quarterback more, especially the Viper position. That was the biggest disappointment of this season, was how little production they got from the starting Viper position. It was great to see him finish the year off on a strong note and all that kind of stuff, and that's great. But you can't have your starting Viper only get you 18 pass pressures the entire year. You can't.
Because that position is designed to get pass rush pressures. I mean, that's the designation of that position, and having that person also have to be good enough to drop into coverage at times and get after the quarterback and be a run stuffer. I mean, it's got to be your most versatile defensive lineman. And even though it's going to be the same kid from last year to next year, he's got to be better. He's got to be better.
One of the revelations, though, Josh Burnham really stepped up this year. And I'm going to have an article coming out later today about, look, it's replace and reload at defensive end. Because the way that Notre Dame calls the field end, they call it defensive end, and they call the Viper. I mean, it's when I say defensive end, that's what I'm referring to.
Right.
But part of the reason they're putting Josh Burnham over there to the defensive end position is because of how well he played this year, and they're going to give him a shot to start, obviously, and he'll battle with RJ open. But
love it.
That was it was nice to see that. But the concern looking forward, it would be, boy, that Viper position's a bit of a question mark, and it was a disappointing position for the most part this year. That's got to get better, in my opinion, moving forward. The run defense still is not where it needs to be. It's
in the
better,
30s, right? They're like,
well, they ended up like 29th, but a lot of that was because of the fact that they completely shut down Oregon State's run game in the bowl game when they didn't have 3 starting offensive linemen and their 1,000-yard running back. I mean, you can't ignore that. You can't act like now. Look, I don't care who was not playing. Holding a team to 2 yards is really impressive,
for sure.
But it does need that added context of maybe you would have held them to 60 if all those guys played, and that still would have been great. So you can't just completely ignore that. But you look at you think of the 60-yard touchdown run against Ohio State. You just can't give up that play.
Right.
The way that Duke ran on them in the second half of that game, the way that Clemson ran on them, really the entire game. Those are all things that they're going to have to get better at next season. I mean, Duke ran for season high 189 yards against Notre Dame. Louisville ran on them pretty well, ran for 185 yards. Clemson ran for 176 yards. And even in some of the games like Wake Forest and Stanford, they still gave up over 130 yards in each of those games. Like that's not great. They didn't finish on a great note with their run defense, to be honest with you, in the regular season.
Right.
Of course, the bowl game was phenomenal, but that's an area where I think
different.
there's still room for improvement. And the biggest thing for me is you've got to be more disruptive against the run. And that is something that was a complaint last year that remains a complaint this year. Is there's still a need for more plays against the pass. Against the run, like disruptive plays against the run. There's still a need for that.
Yeah.
Javonte, especially because the guy that brought you your most production against the run on a per snap basis. Javonte Jean-Baptiste had 5.5 tackles for loss this year on just run plays because he had 10.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. So 5 of those were run plays. A lot of your other production came, was guys getting the same number of sacks. Like Jordan Patel had 4 sacks, he had 4.5 tackles for loss. You got a half a tackle for loss from your starting Viper this year in the run game. That's still got to get a lot better.
Yeah.
There needs to be, that's an area where there's still, that's the one, hey, you want to make a jump this year like you made in red zone defense, make it be tackles for loss.
Right. Yeah. If you're looking for that circled stat that you need to get better at, I agree with you.
Yeah, they were at 75 this year. They were at 85 last year. Be nice for this defense to get up near 100.
Yeah.
That would be the ideal number for me, for them to be at, is around 100 tackles for loss. And Notre Dame's never been a great tackle for loss team, but like you talk about Riley Mills, I thought Riley Mills had a heck of a year. Part of the reason he isn't being recognized for it is because he didn't make enough plays on the ball. He was super disruptive, like forcing running backs to make cuts and quarterbacks to make cuts and then other people to clean it up. He's got to start making some more of those plays on the ball.
Yeah.
Those are areas where it needs to get better. And then, of course, the second half against Louisville and the first half against Clemson were low spots this year.
Well, I wanted to ask you about, tackles for loss and in the run game and all of that. Do you think moving forward, I hesitate to say moving forward because we are going to talk, you know what? I'm going to hold this until we talk about, whether the group was good enough this year moving forward. I'll save this. I'm going to write it down because I want to ask you about it, but I digress. So yes, you are absolutely right. Those 2 particular games, those are the money downs, right? Or the money plays that have to be made.
Mm-hmm.
And while they made them in a lot of games, they didn't make them in those 2 games that were vitally important to this season.
And third down, the last one's third down. Your defense has to get better on third down this season. This next, like Ohio, one of the big keys, Ohio State went 10 of 17 on third down. That's the game right there.
Yeah.
Like that's the game.
Oh my gosh. Yes. The third down was abysmal in that game. It was abysmal. It was like every time they got, like the defense did a great job of getting them to third down. And a lot of times it was a 3rd and long. It was a 3rd, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9. Like it felt like there was a lot of times where, okay, 1st and 2nd down were successes. And then they allowed them to convert those 3rd downs.
Mm-hmm.
And those are backbreakers.
Yeah.
Those are absolute backbreakers to a defense because you're doing your job 1st and 2nd down. And then 3rd down, you can't get off the field. Like those are just,
they got better, but not nearly good enough.
Yeah.
They need to be a top 15 third down defense, in my opinion.
Right.
And they were just inside the top 30 this season. So that's going to have to, that's an area where it can get better.
Right.
Definitely an area where it can get better.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with that. For sure. All right. We got one more section to go before we get to the mailbag. But before we do, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends. Shoot us a 5-star review. Head over to the boards.irishbreakdown.com. Then, of course, the website, irishbreakdown.com, for continuing coverage. Remember, Ryan is down at the All-American game in San Antonio. And I just see on the board, stuff coming. He's talking to the recruits. He's got stories coming. He's observing practices, all of that fun stuff. And so lots going on. So make sure you stay locked in because there is no such thing as an off season at Irish Breakdown. That's for sure.
Kind of wish there was, but there isn't.
This is true in a lot of ways. All right, so our final segment, we are going to talk about where things stand, and we're going to talk about each position group. Are they a championship level group, and are they going to be, in our opinion, a championship level group moving forward?
Yeah,
right?
like sort of. Yeah, so we're not going to focus as much on what's there now
Right.
for 2024. But from what we saw in 23, was that good enough to be a championship caliber team? And just overall as a defense, Vince, overall, yes, they were. They were. This team was good enough to be a championship defense. Yeah, I mean, yes, you need to close out Ohio State a little bit better. There's no excuse for having 10 guys in the field those last two plays. None. But you still held Ohio State 17 points.
Sure.
That should have been good enough for a win. You gave up a touchdown fewer points against them than Michigan did. They scored 24 against Michigan. You gave up fewer points to Ohio State than Penn State gave up. Two teams are ranked ahead of you in scoring defense. That should have been good enough. The 33 against Louisville, that was not on the defense. Anyone that watched that game knows that was not on the defense.
Right.
Clemson game, first half, they didn't play well. And of course, you had the muff punt, and there were some things the offense did to help, but still, they didn't make enough stops. But that happens to everybody. I mean, Washington is in the national title game because of their offense. Their offense did not show up to play against Oregon State. They scored 22 points. They didn't play well in that game, right? Michigan is a team that is in the title game because of their defense. There have been times when their defense didn't play great. Now, they were able to get away with it because their schedule is so terrible. But no matter how good you are, you're going to have off days. You just are.
Right.
You're going to have off days. Overall, this defense, to me, was a championship defense.
Agreed.
There are parts of it, however, that we'll get into that aren't quite there for me. But we'll get into it. So let's go position by position, Vince. Or did you want to bring up the thing that you
Well, when we get to that position, I will.
Okay.
Yeah, when we get to that position. So you start front to back like we usually do. Let's start with the defensive line. Defensive line, are they where they need to be? Is this an elite group that can win you a championship?
I'm going to say no, not yet. It was close, but not yet. And the reason I'm going to say that is because what made Notre Dame so good this year was the defensive line was way better. They were, in my opinion, up the middle, about as close as you can get without being elite up the middle, but they're not there yet. The big end position, the defensive end position was, but the lack of plays on the ball from the defense and the struggles at Viper, to me, Vince, are the two things that keep it from being elite. But it was very, very good. Very, very good. And my point is, could this defensive line by itself put the team on its shoulders and carry them? It did a few times, but the corner, it played off of how good the secondary was, in my opinion.
Right.
But it was very, very good. It's not quite elite yet, in my opinion. I think it will be next year, or it can be next year, but you're going to have to get improvements in some areas. That's going to be the key.
Yeah, I feel like they're not elite at the Viper position. I'll say that's the spot where they really need to.
It's a very mediocre position.
I mean, it's
very mediocre.
You can't say that an entire position or group is elite if you've got a mediocre part of it. I mean, I think that's
unless it's not an important part of it,
right?
But that is like
that is,
Notre Dame can have an elite linebacking core without having an elite rover.
Sure, that's a good point,
right?
Because you can mask not having an elite rover with a nickel or with a million different ways, right?
Right.
Yeah,
it's just not a huge playmaking position. It doesn't have to be. Right. That's not true of Viper.
Right. Absolutely. So that's why I agree with you. I thought I was going to have to argue with you on this one. I was going to say I didn't think that they were elite because of the Viper position.
It just like, to me, the whole defense just as a whole, it's kind of like the sum was greater than the individual parts.
Sure.
In a lot of instances. So I think there's people are going to be surprised. There's really only one position that I would consider as a position was elite. And that's a part of, yes, exactly.
Right.
Like you had an elite safety, but did you have an elite safety position? No, you didn't, because an elite safety position makes that play on 3rd and 19 against Ohio State or picks that ball up. I mean, it's just a fact. You know, I mean, they make those plays. And so, but yes, we'll continue. But defensive line wise, they were close. They were out. They were a top 10 defensive line, borderline top 5. But for you to be elite, to me, you need to be top 5, in my opinion.
Sure,
that's
fair. No, I think that's totally fair.
And just like off time, I'd say they were probably like 7 or 8 defensive line wise. So they were close.
They're in there. They're in the neighborhood.
If you want to break the two positions down, I think you could argue that they were elite up the middle.
Okay.
I mean, you had a second-team All-American. Riley Mills is outstanding. You had great depth. I mean, Gabriel Rubio goes down and Donovan Heinisch steps in and you don't miss a beat.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then Rubio comes back. He plays well. Jason Onye did some really nice things. Like, you were pretty good this year on a defensive tackle. Defensive end, you were really good at one spot. You were mediocre at the other. As a whole, the defensive line to me was not elite. But I think you could argue that if you just want to take inside versus outside and you just want to talk about the inside, Vince, and I'm curious of your thoughts on this, I think you could argue that the defensive tackle position group was elite this season.
Yes, I agree with that. And I can't say that Javonte Jean-Baptiste was elite.
No, he was pretty good.
He was really good.
Yeah.
He was really good, exceeded expectations, that kind of a deal. But I don't think he was elite. But I do think the guys in the middle were elite. So I do agree with you on that. I do. But then you've got a severe drop off at Viper throughout the whole year.
Yeah.
So let's go linebacker.
No, right. It was not elite. It was really good, but it wasn't elite. It wasn't. They just
They're
weren't
not even
enough.
Top 10. I'd say top 15.
I'd say top 10. I think they were top 10 because of how. But like, they're bottom of the top 10, and there's a difference between them and like the top group. There just, to me, just wasn't enough production for them to be considered elite. They were very good this year.
Right.
There's no elite player in that group. There's no like guy that you're arguing for like, why that guy. I mean, when they made Namaris Leofau like a semifinalist for the Buckus Award, we were kind of like, what? Seriously? Like, no, sorry, he wasn't that guy.
That shocked me more than anything I saw from the postseason awards. Absolutely blew my mind. I was
like, no. And he did some really nice things this year, and I love what Maris did, and I love how he ended his career, but I just feel like for you to be an elite group, you need a lot more production than they got from that position.
Absolutely correct. No, I completely agree with that. I mean, the linebackers, they epitomized the sum is greater than the parts.
Yes. Yeah.
This group right here epitomizes that for me. Because I thought the group played well. I thought the group overall, they complemented each other well. I thought they made plays. I thought they did what they needed to do. But there was no elite individual, right? There was nobody up for the best linebacker in the country legitimately, in my opinion. It just wasn't. There just wasn't.
When I watch Penn State, and I think Penn State's overrated, but like when I watch Curtis Jacobs and Abdul Carter and Colby King and that linebacking core, I'm just like, that's an elite linebacking core, right? Like that's what an elite linebacking unit looks like.
Right.
And I just don't think this group was there.
Agreed.
Again, they were really good. And I'm not trying to take away from take anything away from them, but they weren't that. They weren't elite.
Right.
They were very good. And to your point, part of what made Notre Dame so good this year, Vince, was that they were just really good everywhere. But to me, to be elite as a unit, you need three guys that are really outstanding.
Right.
Or you need at least one elite guy. That's the key. Yeah.
So this is where my question was going to come in, because we are talking a little bit about next year. And I just want to throw this in there. We're talking about tackles for loss. Do you think with some of the guys that are going to be inserted into the linebacking core, they have an opportunity for more tackles for loss because of the rise in athleticism
and length? Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think so. Like with Drake Bowen, and if Jalen Sneed plays more of a role next year, I think Jack Kaiser is going to be putting some more playmaking spots next year. Now, I do not want Jack Kaiser to be a full-time inside linebacker. I want to see him moved all around.
Right.
But he will play inside at times, and I think if they use him correctly inside, that gives him a chance to make more plays in the ball. He's a much more disruptive player on a per-snap basis than the other linebackers, in my opinion. Could that result in more tackles for loss? Potentially. But when I look at like Drake Bowen and Jalen Sneed and Jaden Alsbury and Kingston Viliama-Asa, do I think those guys bring more potential playmaking production? Yes, they do. They're going to make more mistakes moving forward. Right. But the talent level, the length, the athleticism of next year's group is so much better than this one.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it has a chance to be that. Now, will they be elite next year? Probably not, because you're going to probably have too many mistakes.
Yeah, I feel like
but
25.
They're going to have,
give them a year under the belt of actually playing, I think this depth chart has a chance to be elite at the linebacker position. I would be very surprised if that was the case in 24. I think you kind of, if we're just talking linebackers, right? I think I'm looking at 25 as an opportunity for that group to be elite.
Yes, I think it's going to be really good next year, but it's going to be more flashy with the younger players, and that's okay. That's, I mean, that's
sure.
It's okay.
Yeah,
but it does put more pressure on the defensive line next season to step up and be better.
This is true,
and
because they're going to have to protect those guys to a degree because they're going to be so, not all the time young. But
like, we'll talk about this when we actually do like looking forward and breaking the positions down. But I could even see the defensive end position being even more productive next year than it was this year.
Yeah.
With Burnham and RJ Oben compared to Nana and Javonte Jean-Baptiste.
Sure.
So that's part of my thought process of it being elite next year too. It just has to get better, in my opinion.
Right. So let's keep moving back. Let's go corners. And you kind of teased your way into the corners.
It's not even a tease. It's flat. It's an elite group. I mean, I think Notre Dame had the best cornerback room in college football this year.
Right.
It's debatable, but meaning it's debatable, meaning like someone can make a case, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. I don't agree with it, but I see what you're saying. For me, it's a no-brainer. With all due respect to Alabama, with all due respect to Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State, and other teams that had really, really good corners, I'm not trading the four that they had for anybody. And if you want to throw Thomas Harper in that conversation, because he's more of a corner than he is a safety, that there's nobody.
Right.
There's nobody that was better than Notre Dame's group. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, they're top 5. The point is, if you're going to debate it, you're not debating are they in the top 5 or not. You're debating if they're number 1 or not.
Correct. So whether they're 1 or 2
or
they're
5,
still elite.
Right?
Yeah,
or
they're
5.
They're still a championship
elite.
level.
Yeah.
They're still elite. You can still win a championship with those guys.
No doubt. I mean, I'm not trading Notre Dame's corners for Alabama's as good as they are. I'm not trading them for Penn State's as good as they are. I'm not trading them for Michigan's as good as they are. I'm not trading for Georgia's as good as they are. And I'm not trading for Ohio State's as good as they are. Because like all those teams had a guy that you could argue was as good or better than anyone Notre Dame had, but nobody had the 1-2 punch that Notre Dame had. You could argue, if you accept the premise that Cam Hart is Notre Dame's best corner, you could argue that Kool-Aid McKinstry's as good as him. You could argue that Will Johnson's as good as him. You could argue that Denzel Burke's as good as him. You know what I mean? But what you can argue is that their number 2 is as good as Benjamin Morrison,
right?
In my opinion. And then if you flip it and you say Benjamin Morrison's Notre Dame's best corner, okay, fine. He had more production and all that. You can't tell me that their number 2 is better than Cam Hart. It's the same argument no matter who you think is Notre Dame's number 1.
Sure.
And then when you talk about what they're bringing off the bench with Christian Gray and Jaden Mickey, the way they played, it's like I just don't see anybody being better. So we could have a show and we could bring a Michigan guy on who would debate that theirs are better, and he'd have a good case. And you could bring a Bama guy on who could make that argument. He'd have a good case because Kool-Aid McKinstry is an elite corner and Terrion Arnold's a good corner. I think he's a little overrated, but he's a pretty good corner. Sure. It's still a very good duo. And, Penn State's guy could come on. His argument would be less compelling because I think both of Notre Dame's corners are better than their best corner, but it's still a pretty good tandem with Johnny Dixon, but at the end of the day, anyone that's actually watched Notre Dame cannot come away thinking this isn't a top 5 cornerback room, in my opinion. And if you are, then you don't know what you're talking about. I will say. If you're going to tell me that there may be a group or two better, fine. If you're going to tell me it's not top 5, I will lose respect for you as an analyst. And I'll tell you, you didn't watch Notre Dame this year.
And you're letting your passion get in the way of your analysis, if that's the case.
Well, I'd say you're letting your bias. You're assuming because of what Notre Dame has been in the past that you're assuming that they're not elite now. Because they don't have a first-round draft pick prospect or whatever the case may be.
Right.
That but just the level of their play is as good as anybody in the country, in my opinion. And the film tells you that, and the statistics tell you that.
Right.
It all tells you that.
Right. Well, one more position on defense, safety, where Notre Dame has their All-American. But it's not about one guy; it's about the group.
Right.
And so, thoughts on this particular group at safety?
It was top 10. Right. It wasn't top 5. It was a very good group, and obviously they had a top 5 safety. They had an elite safety. I mean, like ESPN actually, like they had Xavier Watts ranked as the number 25 player in college football this year. Just fair. I mean, it's fine. I probably am a little higher, but it's fine. But they pointed out what we've been pointing out. all of his turnovers resulted in points. Like that's the reality of it. They somebody just said Benjamin Morrison's a first round. No, he's not. He's a sophomore. He can't go into the draft. So he can't be a first round pick. You can't be a first round pick if you can't go in the draft. So anyway, before I get sidetracked, but he was an elite player. But there's a big drop off between him and DJ Brown, who again was really steady this year.
Right.
But in 2 big games that they lost, DJ and Xavier had chances to make plays in clutch moments. And in both instances, DJ failed in both instances, and Xavier didn't make the play he needed to against Ohio State on the tackle of Travion Henderson. Right now, it wasn't all his fault. Cam Hart got held on the play, but he needs to make that play. Louisville game similar, right? And then the drop off from DJ to Ramon Henderson was stark.
Yeah.
And it was stark. Ramon struggled this year, in my opinion.
Yeah.
He did. So there just wasn't the depth. Like part of what makes the cornerback room in the top 5 is that you lost Benjamin Morrison before the Pitt game started, and you lost Cam Hart during the first half.
So you're playing your backups.
Yeah. With Christian Gray and Jaden Mickey.
Right.
Like you didn't miss a beat.
Right.
And so, I look at it and I'm like, that's elite. And Pitt had decent receivers. So it's not like Pitt didn't have good receivers and they just put them on clamps. That's when you know you're good. I mean,
go ahead.
They didn't miss a beat against Oregon State. As good as Cam Hart was, they go out and play Jaden Mickey and Christian Gray, and it didn't miss a beat.
And Christian Gray was making plays, man.
Yeah, didn't miss a beat.
Yeah.
And that's part of what makes it so good is it's just the depth is. I mean, if there's a lot of teams on Notre Dame's schedule that would love to have Notre Dame's backup corners, Jaden Mickey and Christian Gray.
Oh,
nobody's begging to have Notre Dame's 3rd and 4th safeties as their starting safeties. Nobody.
True.
Notre Dame's not trying to get those guys to be starters next year. Right? So, yeah.
Let me rephrase the question for you just for fun. Let's just say secondary. Notre Dame's secondary.
Yes.
Are they elite?
Elite, yes. As a group, they are. Because you had an elite corner room and one elite safety. And then you had a really good nickel. And that one safety position wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible.
Right.
So as a whole,
and when you have all those other guys, I'm not saying you can cover up for that safety, but there's certain things that you can do. And that's just like any position football for the most part. You can, if you've got elite guys everywhere, and I'm just talking about the secondary, obviously. If you've got elite guys everywhere, you can do some things to kind of hide a guy or whatever. You know what I mean? Right. So I agree with you. I just wanted to hear what you'd have to say when we talk about the secondary as a whole.
Right. That's the point. Is as a unit, they're elite.
Yeah.
As when you break them into safety and corner, the safeties aren't elite as a whole, even though they have an elite safety in the group.
Right.
It just, the depth isn't there. And the number 2 just wasn't quite impactful. Like when I look at other teams, 1-2 punch at safety, their number 2 is really good, where Notre Dame's was just really solid and steady and, good player. But again, in the big moments, they couldn't step up and make those plays.
Right.
That's the reality of it.
All right.
And so you need that to break them down. But like as a group, it was really, really good. So elite on the back end as a whole, top 5 secondary. You could argue they were the best secondary in college football this year. You could argue that as take them together.
Yeah.
That's more debatable. But they're in the conversation.
They're definitely top 5. If you're debating for number 1, they're obviously definitely
as a unit. Put them together.
Yeah, right.
Defensive line top 10, linebacking core top 10, defensive line borderline top 5, but not in the top 5. Linebacker closer to being out of the top 10 than in the top 5.
There are different spots of the top 10. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, and if someone were to tell me that the linebacking core was more top 15 than top 10, I wouldn't push back on it too hard. And again, top 10 is just more of a gut feel as opposed to.
It's not like you've got like a list of teams or anything.
Yes.
It's like when you're talking about recruiting, you're like, that's a top 100 guy or that's a top 250 guy. It's not like you've got a list of guys and he's 87. You know what I mean? Or whatever the case may be. It is, that is the look of a top 100 guy.
Right.
I agree with that completely. Yeah. Because that can fluctuate, obviously, year to year and all of that.
D-line, I've put more thought into that, and I'm more confident saying that it's a top 5 it's a borderline top 5 group, but not quite there yet. Secondary, I've put a
Okay.
lot of thought into that. I haven't done that for linebacker because my gut never made me think, gee, I wonder where they stack up against the best. Like I've thought that for the
Sure.
D line in the secondary.
Sure. At times, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I've never
Yes.
thought that. For
Right.
the defensive line to get into that top group, they need to be more disruptive on the ball, more tackles for loss, more turnover worthy plays, whether they be sacks, strip sacks, batted balls that get picked off. It's not just about sacks. Like if the sack number doesn't go up next year, and I bet you $20 Marcus Freeman and Al Gold will tell you the same thing. I don't care about what our sack number was. Don't care. But they do want the hits on the quarterback to go up. The consistency of the pass rush to be better. That would be an improvement.
Right.
And then, of course, being more impactful in the run game. That's the biggest need for the D-line. If they can do more of that next year, Vince, then I would argue that they have a chance to be a top 5 group. Because I'll say this. I think just athletically, Notre Dame's going to be a better defensive line next year athletically. As you see Josh Burnham start playing more, as you see R.J. Oben get here, the Josh Burnham, R.J. Oben 1-2 punch is going to be more athletic than the duo of Javonte Jean-Baptiste and Nano Safa-Mensah, just athletically, and then this year you look at, Jordan Patelho and Junior Tuihalamaka, but you're going to throw Boubacar Traore probably in their Viper next year.
Yep. I mean, he was listed as the initial backup at both defensive end positions for the bowl game.
Yeah,
you know
one of the number 3. Yeah,
yeah. I mean,
right. He took Josh Burnham's role in that regard.
Yeah.
That's where Burnham was all year.
Yeah,
but they had Burnham at the field end position. So
he's going to get some clock next year.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
It's going to be fun to watch.
Well, as long as he does what they hope he's going to do this offseason. He's a guy. You talk about moving forward. It's guys like him that are going to determine whether or not Notre Dame can be an elite defensive line next year.
Sure.
It's going to be Josh Burnham's. It's going to be Boubacar Traore breaking out. It's going to be Jason Onye taking that next step on top of Riley Mills being more productive. That's going to be because Riley Mills was really good this year, but he has to be more productive on the ball. That's the thing holding him back from really taking that jump to being an All-American type of player is just more production on the ball. He's super disruptive. It's just you got to make more plays on the ball. That's going to be a big key.
Yep.
Secondary is going to be interesting next year because
what's that second safety's position? Who's that going to be?
That's
a big question mark
because they're actually going to be more athletic. You talk about a Don Schuler and Ben Minnick, and they're still going to the portal trying to find a safety, and the safety position will be interesting. Cornerback should still be great again. I think Benjamin Morrison's going to be a lot better next year, and then of course Christian Gray and Jaden Mickey, and you got Jordan Clark at nickel. We'll see how he does. Some things I like about him, some things I'm a little bit more leery of him on film than I am of Thomas Harper, but I still see some really good things from him. And so it has a chance, but linebacking core is going to take a little bit of a step back next year from a consistency standpoint. But I think we're going to see them make more plays. So this defense has a chance to be even better next year, but there's also a chance it takes a slight step back next year and then jumps back up into top 5 category in 2025. A chance. Yeah. Again, a chance it could take a step back. But again, it could also be better because if the potential turns into production with those young players, if Drake Bowens, the Jaden Ausburys, the Boubacar Traores, the Josh Burnhams, if those guys really break out next year in the front 7, then okay, wow, this defense could really take a step. Because there's a lot of talent in that group, Vince. Yeah, a lot of talent in that group.
Right.
So that's where I'm at.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for our look back on the 23 defense. And if you missed the offense, make sure you check it out. We did that on Tuesday, so it's already up on as a podcast. And obviously, you can go if you want to see these beautiful faces. You can go watch it on YouTube as well. No, all right. Well,
and why would anyone want to do that?
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. But anyway, you can go check out offense. We did that on Tuesday. Now we've done the defensive one. So make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends. Leave us a 5-star review and check out the boards.irishbreakdown.com, as well as the website, irishbreakdown.com. Always bringing the info to you. So you will not be disappointed if you check out either one of those or both spots. I promise you. All right, Brian, I am assuming that we have some
Yep.
mailbag questions.
We have enough for a mailbag. Yep, we do.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. I've still got it on block, so I don't know what we got going on here. We got a super chat here from Paul. Thank you so much, Paul. Really appreciate you. That's for the great year IB. Cannot remember the last time I've been so excited for the future. Oh, and can you use this for singing lessons for Sean and Ryan? Thanks.
That would be wasting money. Like, I am not a fan of just peeing money away, and wasting money on singing lessons for Sean and Ryan would, that would just be.
That was an unscripted moment of the post-game show. Let me tell you,
I'd much rather give it to charity than waste it. I
mean, you could argue that is charity, but
no, it's not. No one. That's not charity. That's not helpful to our society whatsoever. Doing more, get you guys to more sing more. No, just no. Appreciate you, Paul. Thank you, man.
Thanks,
I appreciate that very much. I'm such a hater.
From Shaquille Oatmeal. Thank you very much, Shaq. Appreciate you. He says, hi, guys. When you get the IB After Dark show going, are there plans to remix the intro music and put some saxophone in there? Salty wants to know. He wants to jazz it up.
Yeah. No, I don't have any plans to change that now. You never know. Like, if somebody puts, like, the whole thing about our music now is the guy reached out and asked about wanting to put something together for us. And he asked me what kind of music I like. And man. And he put it together and I loved it. I mean, I love I still now today I play it. I'm like, yep, it still pops. I still dig it. You know,
it gets me in the mood every time we're about to start
a show. It does. It's got that it's like, no matter what we're talking about, or if I'm ticked off or we're laughing and joking, whatever mood we're in, it just, okay, it's focus time. It gets you ready to rock and roll. So
agreed.
I dig it. But what's funny is, Vince, I actually love the saxophone. I love the sound of the saxophone.
Oh yeah.
Whether it's regular sax, bass sax is okay, but like alto sax, like there's like a lot of those that I really dig. I actually played the saxophone in middle school. So yeah.
I have so many talents.
Yes. Well, my parents were very big into having us do a lot of different things.
Oh yeah.
And so like they made me take piano lessons for 2 years. I did not like the piano. Sure. They made me play an instrument. I could pick which one I wanted to play, and I picked the saxophone because I'm a man. I always was a man. So I wasn't gonna be like a trumpet guy. And then we had one guy that played the flute. I was like, nah, I'm good. But no, I'm just kidding. But I played the saxophone and I enjoyed it very much. I still have it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
look at you.
I think it's at my mom's house because she's let I've had nieces and nephews that borrowed it to play it and all that. Go ahead.
Okay. All 4 of my older kids all play an instrument, and the youngest one hasn't had an opportunity yet. But we're a very musical family over here.
Well, it's good because you never know what a kid's going to fall in love with if you don't make them try it. And
we got quite a band going here when they all play together. So,
what do they play? Do they play like flute?
So
trumpets.
Dylan plays the trumpet.
Mm-hmm.
Chloe plays the trumpet as well.
Okay.
And then Lily plays the flute, and Ella plays the clarinet.
Okay.
Yep.
Clarinet's an interesting sounding instrument too.
Yes, it is.
I like the clarinet.
Yes, it is. When all 4 of them get together and they play, all 4 of them played at their great grandfather's funeral.
Oh wow!
And that was a really that was a moment. You know what I mean? It was really cool. Really cool. And their aunts, my wife she plays the flute. Okay. And then her brothers also are musical, and so they played as well. So it was like the whole grandkids and great grandkids.
Get them to do the IB after dark music. No saxophone though. Yeah.
No, there's no saxophone in the family. Maybe Liam.
Okay.
Maybe we'll see.
That's
He's only 8.
The deal. That's the deal. As big as he is right now. So yeah.
Robert Bishop. Thanks for the question. Let's see here. If Denbrock has been named OC a couple of weeks sooner, would they still have targeted Riley Leonard, or would he have preferred a different type of quarterback? It's a good question.
A very good question. I absolutely think he would have gone after Riley Leonard because Riley Leonard is very much the type of quarterback Mike Denbrock has had success with.
Yes. Agreed.
Mike Denbrock's success at Notre Dame, his success at Cincinnati and LSU has all been with dual threat quarterbacks.
Right.
And he is, to me, the best dual threat quarterback in the portal.
Right.
And
it was available.
So easily. Mm-hmm. And everyone knows our thoughts on Riley Leonard and how high we've been on him for a couple years now. So no question he would have he would have still gone after him.
Right.
And I mean, he would have fit it perfectly. I mean, Deshaun Kaiser, Malik Zaire, Everett Golson, all kind of dual threat guys, although Everett was less of a runner than the other two.
Sure.
But that whole 15 team was built around Malik and his ability to run, throw. And then, of course, Deshaun comes in, does the same thing. Desmond Ridder, obviously, it was a guy that was effective. I mean, he's had three since 2015 in his first year as an offensive coordinator. And so he's been an offense coordinator, 8 years, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 9 years. In 2014, actually, so 10 years. In his 10 years as an offensive coordinator, he's had 3 different quarterbacks rush for 10 or more touchdowns in a season, double-digit touchdowns. And you got to think, like, at Cincinnati, he had one starting quarterback for most of his tenure.
Yep.
I mean, his 21, 2019, 4 of his 5 years since he had one same quarterback. And so LSU, he had one quarterback in 2 years. So he's had a lot of success with those type of guys.
Yeah.
So
it fits the mold.
I would, very much.
It fits the mold. If you start thinking back to the kind of offense that was run, and it's not going to be identical, obviously, but they had some QB power and just some different things, and they used the quarterback in the run game like it was a legitimate part of the run game, and Riley Leonard fits that mold anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I am very interested to see Mike Denbrock's spin on what the Notre Dame offense can be. There's no doubt about that, because it's going to be his. I mean, with obviously some direction from Marcus Freeman as far as, in the program and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But this is going to be Mike Denbrock's offense. And I don't know that was fully the case the last time Mike Denbrock was here.
Wasn't necessarily, no. I mean, he put it anytime you're going to put your stamp on it. But
sure.
He was doing a lot of stuff that was more dictated by the head football coach. Yeah.
Sure. So it's going to be
interesting. I think partly held it back to a degree.
I agree.
Yeah.
DMND 13. Ryan said on his All-American Bowl Day 2 recap that he believes KVA will be a starter at some point in 24. How much do you agree or disagree?
I won't say it that definitively. No, I won't say he will be a starter. I will say he can be a starter.
Right.
It wouldn't shock me, but I'm not going to say he will be, because I think he's going to have a hard time just immediately beating out all the guys he'd have to beat out to be the starter outside of injury. Would it shock me if at some point in time next year he ends up being one of the best 2? Not at all. Not at all. So I wouldn't say that I necessarily disagree with Ryan. I'm just not going to say I agree with him either, because I don't. I think it would right now. It would take. I mean, he's still in high school, and I know he's doing really well down there. But like, those guys are all going to have a year or 2 on them, as well,
in the system too. Not
right.
That's
physically, kind of what I'm referring
in the weight room, in the system, all of it, right? And I tend to fall on that side of things too. The kid's super talented. This is a huge get for Notre Dame. And the kid, I mean, he's one of those kids that they broke the mold of middle linebacker, and they're like, "Yep, this guy."
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really excited about what he's going to be at Notre Dame. There's no doubt about that. But it's going to be tough to start. And he's not saying obviously he's going to start day 1. He's saying at some point during 2024. Could I see him maybe get a start late in the season at will, alongside? Yeah, okay, maybe I could see that. It wouldn't surprise me, but there's a lot of talent. But I mean, what have we been talking about for the last 2 years about all the talent that's being stockpiled at linebacker? You can't just expect a guy to come in and just blow all those guys away. Could it happen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it could. I'm not willing to put, that kind of a definitive statement on it yet.
Agree.
Zach 32, scale of 1 to 10. How likely is it that Golden comes back?
I mean, as of right now, from what I'm hearing, it's like an 8 or 9 as of right now, but if not 10, but that's because the NFL stuff hasn't opened up yet. I mean, we don't know who's going to be interested in them from the NFL.
Right.
And I don't think Al Golden's just going to take any D coordinator job just to take one in the NFL.
Agreed.
I don't. But there are some potential options that if they came open, or depending on who gets hired as head coach, things along those lines, that you could maybe see him leave.
Sure.
But he's engaging Notre Dame about an extension. You don't do that if you're just 1 foot out the door. Right. Like, for example, Kirby Moore from Missouri. His extension offer sat on his desk for weeks. because he was waiting to see what was going to happen at Notre Dame with Mike Denbrock and some other things. But that's why he didn't sign it yet. You know what I mean? So usually when a guy knows he's leaving or would like to leave, he won't engage on an extension, or he'll just kind of let it sit. Most guys are respectful enough to do that. Now, Mike Denbrock's situation is a little bit different, right? Because he signed his extension before Notre Dame's spot came open. Now, it never got finalized and all that other kind of stuff, so it never became official, but he signed it before Notre Dame had an opening at offensive coordinator.
I didn't realize he signed it. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he signed it, but it's like it never went to –
it never got all the way through the system or whatever.
He say signed it. He agreed to it.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Is more what I mean. He agreed to it.
Yep. Okay.
It just didn't go through all the formals. Got to get approved by the board.
Right.
It was agreed to.
They hadn't hashed out all the details.
Well, no, they had.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they had. It just the board never brought it up at the one meeting they had in the winter, and then they weren't going to bring it up again until February. But everything had been agreed to. But it's a state school; it has to go through the board process and all that other kind of stuff. So whether that meant it was signed or what, or it was a verbal agreement, I don't know. It doesn't matter. Right. That's what matters is he agreed to the extension, right? But it was never finalized, which meant when Notre Dame got him to leave, they were working with the old contract, which meant a much smaller buyout.
Sure.
Now, when Mike Denbrock's negotiating his salary at Notre Dame, I promise you he's working off of the number he agreed to with LSU.
For sure, yeah.
Right? And so that's kind of how that stuff works.
Yeah. But, I mean, that's the thing about, just to answer this question, Zach, I mean, I feel very good about where things stand with Al Golden. So that's why I'll put it at like an 8. And an 8's that's a strong number, right? That's a strong number for him to come back. But there's that window of there could be an offer that's just too good to pass up that is perfect for him. And I don't know. I don't know what that is. I think maybe Brian has a better idea of what that is. It doesn't matter.
About what, the number?
No, just like who could call him to be a DC and like that. I don't know all those details. I'm just saying
those jobs aren't there yet. They're not open yet.
100%. And so we're not even going to know what the possibilities of those jobs would be until next week. And then I don't think Al Golden's getting calls to be a head coach. He'd be getting calls to be a defensive coordinator. And so a head coach has to be hired first. Then he has to start putting together his staff. So, I mean, we're looking at a few weeks before everything is all set in stone. At least a month.
Yeah, I would imagine.
February. Right. I think that's a safe place.
If we get close to the start of spring practice and Al Golden is still here, you start feeling a little bit better.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Matthew Ketzner, am I wrong saying that Marcus Freeman and his teams have the potential to be on the level of Lou Holtz and his teams? I'm starting to feel that way.
I don't think you're wrong. I mean, Matthew, I've been saying this for a little while. I feel Notre Dame's going to win a title in the next 3 to 5 years. I really, truly believe that. And there's a lot of reasons for it. Marcus Freeman's very different from Lou Holtz. Doesn't have the experience Lou Holtz had in a lot of different ways, but the one thing that led to a lot of success that Lou Holtz had at Notre Dame was talent acquisition.
Yeah.
I mean, guys, they weren't winning back then with just mediocre players that Lou Holtz was turning into stars. I mean, they were recruiting. They had the number 1 recruiting class for like 3 or 4 straight years. Like they could, with Vinny Serrato and what they did. And, Chad Bowden is Marcus Freeman's Vinny Serrato. The difference is Marcus likes to recruit a lot more than Coach Holtz did, if you talk to people. I mean, Joe Rudolph's going to recruit a lot more than Joe Moore did back then. Joe Moore was just like, go get me dudes and I'll coach them up, right? That's pretty much how it was.
Right.
And so this group is got a chance to be that from a talent acquisition standpoint. The question is, are they going to be there from a development standpoint? That's still a little bit of a question mark in certain areas, but I'm more confident about that now than I was a couple of years ago. I mean, Marcus Freeman's coaching staff in 2024 is going to be way better than the last coaching staff Brian Kelly had. Like way better in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And you have a head coach now that will recruit.
Yep.
That's the difference.
It all comes down to talent acquisition for me. I mean, we can talk scheme and we can talk play calling and all that. And it's all important. Don't get me wrong. That is all important. But if you start stockpiling the talent that I believe Notre Dame has and will continue to stockpile, it makes it a lot easier. There's an old expression, right? Is it the X's and O's or the Jimmies and Joes? The X's and O's part becomes a little bit simpler when you've got the Jimmies and Joes.
Oh, the answer to that is always yes. Right? Is it the X's and O's or the Jimmies and the Joes? It's yes.
Right. For
I mean,
sure.
there's really talented teams that don't win the way that Bama does,
That's
or
true.
Georgia does, or whatever. And like Washington and Michigan, very well coached football teams, great X's and O's, but they're also not a bunch of mediocre players. I mean, Michael Penix is a dude. That receiving core is loaded with high draft picks, right? I mean, there's Braylon Trice is going to be a day 1, day 2 draft pick when he comes out. You know what I mean? Like, there's dudes on both of those teams. They may not have as many future first-round picks as Bama does or Ohio State does, but they've got a lot of talent as well. Now, the team that has gone 25-2 at Washington, the only real addition that's been impactful is Michael Penix, right? And he's really good, but he's not the difference between 4-8, which is what they were in 2021, and 25-2. He's the final. But what changed? Great coaching staff came in and replaced one that sucked. That's the difference.
Right.
Notre Dame was basically the same team in 2017 they were in 2016, but they lost Equanimous. I mean, not Equanimous St. Brown, but they lost I'm trying to think of some of the guys they lost. They lost to Sean Kaiser, right? Just thinking of some of the players they lost from the 2016 team compared to the 2017 team. Pull some of them up here real quick. Lost James Onwualu off that team, 2016. Lost, I believe, Isaac Rochelle off that team, 2016 team. Lost Cole Luke. Lost Jerron Jones. So, like, they lost some guys off that team in 2017 that they had in 2016, right? But the difference was they were coached so much better.
Yeah.
It's got to be both. But you also are going to take a great coaching. If you take Kalen DeBoer and that staff and you hand them Colorado's roster, they'll be better than 4-8, but they're not going to be anywhere close to what Washington is. Right? I mean, so it's both. It's got to be both.
Yep.
And the talent acquisition was always going to be limited to a degree under Brian Kelly because he was just not going to do enough to bring in those final pieces. Right. And Marcus Freeman is. And the best hire Marcus Freeman ever made was Chad Bowden and allowing him to then build up that part of the staff as well. Sure. And, like Dre Brown and all those guys who do great work with Chad, and it's huge.
99 problems, but BK ain't one. I know it's probably way too early, but do you think Kaiser will be the starting will and get the majority of the snaps, or be the starting will and part of a rotation?
I think that's TBD. I mean, it depends on how other guys perform in the spring.
Right. How do they develop and how, absolutely. Because you know what you're going to get from Jack Kaiser. I think we all at this point know, and we know that it was a great thing to keep him on this roster for next year.
You use him correctly. He's very impactful.
Absolutely. And I think ideally it's the last one. He starts at will, but it's part of a rotation where he moves to different spots as well, not just will. Like, I think you move him around and allow him to be dynamic.
I'll say this. I hope that he doesn't start at will. That's actually still my hope.
Okay.
My hope is that somebody steps up at will and they can keep Jack in more of that rover role, to be honest with you. That's still my hope. Whether it's Jalen Sneed or Jaden Alsbury or Kingston or whoever, my hope is that somebody steps up and keeps Jack in sort of that rover, rotate inside. So it's actually his rotation is he's the second will off the bench. That's my hope.
Starting rover, second will.
Yes.
Move him around, allow him to still be as impactful as he was this year.
Correct.
But the fact that he's back and he can be the leader of that room makes
and can play will if someone doesn't step up.
Right. That's true. He's like the ultimate insurance policy, to be honest with you. I mean, that's who Jack Kaiser is.
That's what he should be anyway.
Yeah.
And I've said all along, my big fear, however, is that Al Golden's just going to plug him in the middle of the defense and just leave him there and not let anybody else potentially push him back outside or something like that. That's my big fear. My big fear.
Andy Milton fan, why do you think D-line was more effective this year? Buy-in, talent.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, no, those are the overall makeup of the D-line looks so much better this year because you could take Riley Mills, who played defensive end in 2022, bump him into 3 technique where he's just better, replace him with Javonte Jean-Baptiste. That alone made it a more talented defensive line than it was last year everywhere other than Viper.
Right.
Like the significantly better fit. Then you also have the development piece. The job that Howard Cross did putting in the work, but then also the development and the coaching and the push that he got and Riley got and Jason Onye got from Al Washington. Javante Jean-Baptiste, his game was better this year than it was at Ohio State. He got coached up in a way that made him a better football player this year by Al Washington. So it's both. Yeah, there was a lot of buy-in. And also, too, and I've said this a lot, and this is true for Joe Rudolph looking forward, and there's a question about that coming up. Part of being a good coach is knowing your players, too, and it can take time to really know your players the way the ins and outs, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and things along those lines. Like I had a lot of success during my coaching career in year ones with guys making big jumps. But a lot of that was because I was a lot of times walking into situations where the floor was so much lower. You know what I mean? Where it's like when I went to Christopher Newport and we set scoring records, passing records, total offense records, and all this kind of stuff, because offense had been abysmal there. They were winning with defense.
Yeah.
And so when we did all these things, because we had talent, but like we changed things. And, I came in as a pass game coordinator and we actually started passing the ball. And I brought some schemes that like started to allow them to maximize the player's talent. But like that's different than what like Al Washington and Al Gold and Joe Rudolph walked into, because they were replacing really effective coaches. So it's just different, where that second year of really knowing the ins and outs of what makes your players tick. How does this kid get motivated compared to this guy? How you motivate Riley Mills is going to be different than how you motivate Jason Onye. It's going to be how you motivate differently than Gabriel Rubio and Howard Cross and, across the board. And it takes time to learn those things. And I think Coach Washington had a better sense of, kind of what buttons to push. But again, there was also a lot more buy-in. When he would speak, they would listen. That wasn't always the case last year. Same with Joe Rudolph. Now, I'm not saying the offensive linemen weren't listening to him. I've not heard that. So I don't want to – but it's still – he's got to know them better. They've got to know him better and what he means when he says certain things and those type of deals. So in year two, I do expect a jump in year two. Now, how much of one? That's going to be the question mark. But I think when it comes to the D-line, it is a combination of talent. The line was just situated better with Riley Mills coming inside and then Javante Jean-Baptiste coming in. Right. You had Josh Burnham in the rotation more, and there just was a little bit more athleticism this year than the year before. And I think that's going to take an even bigger jump next year. So let's get to this next one from Paul.
Okay, from Paul. Is it me, or did the tackling from earlier this season to the end of the season get a lot better?
Yes, I agree with you completely, Paul.
We talked about that. I think my judgment of the 2023 season was a little clouded over the 22 season because it got so much better towards the end. To be honest with you, as Brian reminded me, I remembered back to some of the earlier games. I was like, oh my gosh, here we go again. Because I remember thinking that now that I was reminded of it. But it did, I would say the latter 2/3 of the season, the tackling got so much better this year than it was last year.
Yeah, no question about it. No question about it.
God's impartial witness. A little off topic here, but LSU freshman wide receiver Jaylen Brown jumped in the portal a few days ago. Any shot the staff makes a move to land him, or is he simply chasing a bag?
Well, I don't know enough about his situation to know that that's why he jumped in the portal. I mean, I don't think he played a whole lot at LSU this year. It could be, he wants to go somewhere he's got more playing time. Maybe he wants to go closer to home. I mean, there's a lot of things that could factor into it. I mean, I'm looking at the season and he didn't catch a ball this year.
Where's home for him?
Florida.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, most likely when a kid like that jumps in the portal, he has an idea of where he's looking, and I doubt Notre Dame is where he's looking. And so, I'd look at him. I like Jaylen Brown coming out of high school. I definitely look at him. I just don't think that's the direction that Notre Dame staff is going, and I doubt that he is looking at Notre Dame in that regard. I think normally, like I said, I know it's like, hey, there's a reason that Notre Dame tends to look at kids that are at like FIU and places like that, because they're more jumping in the portal because they are looking for a better opportunity. Where some of these guys that are leaving like LSU, like Quinshon Judkins, has an idea of the schools he's going to look at because he's jumping in for money. You've been elite. You've rushed for 30 touchdowns the last 2 years, Ole Miss. You've been 1,000-yard rush the last 2 years, Ole Miss. You're not losing your playing time. You're just jumping in to grab a bag. I don't know enough about Jaylen Brown's situation to know that that's the reason he's jumping in or not. He may be unhappy that he didn't play a lot this year. Maybe he doesn't click with the receivers coach. Maybe he's homesick.
Right.
There could be a lot of reasons why, and I don't want to speculate on it, but I doubt that Notre Dame is a school that he would look at, or that would go very far for Notre Dame. Very talented kid, though.
Yeah. Titus, will Coach Rudolph make a similar jump as Al Washington? How could Coogan and Spindler be the starting guards at a place like Notre Dame? What's worse, they continued playing in spite of their performances.
Well, I mean, their performance wasn't as bad as you're making it out to be. I don't think it's quite that bad. But I thought Rocco Spindler actually showed some really good things.
I agree.
We also have to remember these two kids are also both in their first years at Notre Dame and in the starting lineup. So, I mean, look, they're did you watch the Alabama game? I mean, did Pat Coogan ever play as bad as Seth McLaughlin did against Michigan? You know what I mean? So, like, yeah, guys, very few teams have like 5 dudes across the board. To your point, however, I did feel like it was a mistake not working in a guy like Billy Schrouth sooner. I will give you that, Titus. Like, so, I mean, we'll find some common ground here. I don't think the guard play was as bad as you make. Like, how could guys like this ever start at Notre Dame? I mean, they're okay players. I think, like I said, Rocco showed a lot more potential because when Rocco was on, he was pretty good.
Sure.
When he was not on, he looked pretty bad. So like you just keep working with him and be more consistent and have those good moments be more prominent. And obviously the knee injury is a concern for me with him, but he showed me some promise. Pat's a great backup, but if he's your 5th guy and the other 4 are really, really good, you're still going to have a really good offensive line with Pat Coogan there. I just would hope that they do give the younger guys a chance to beat him out. But, Pat Coogan's the floor of the guard position, Vince, and that's okay. Right. Meaning, like, if somebody doesn't play better than him, then he's going to play at a certain level. You just hope that somebody more talented can beat him out. But if they don't, then you can't just put them in there just because they're more talented. They've got to be able to produce, on a consistent basis. And that's going to be the key is, can someone force him off the field next year?
Right.
That's going to be the key. And hopefully they do, because to your point, and that would be a symbol of Coach Rudolph making that second-year jump is him having a better way to, how do I get Sam Pendleton to make a jump? How do I get Sullivan Absher to make a jump? How can I figure out how to use Ty Chan more effectively? I mean, there's enough talent there that they should be better, talent-wise than what at left guard. But like I said, if Pat Coogan, let's not also act like Pat Coogan can't get better either. He's not going to get better physically, but he certainly can improve his technique and those type of things and be more assignment correct and be a better player next year. Like, he is what he is from a talent standpoint. That's the reality of it. But there's a level for his game to be better.
Sure.
It's just not going to be ton better. But if the pieces around him are better, then the line will be better, in my view.
Salty, what's going on? What needs
I think that meant to be mailbag.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fair. What needs to happen for Notre Dame to get a better Viper? I'd personally start by changing that position's name. It sounds goofy.
Well, they were pretty good at Viper the 2 previous years. I mean, look, it's just about Jordan Patelho playing to his potential, number 1. And then number 2, developing the really talented younger players that they've recruited. I mean, Boubacar Traore, if he stays at Viper, Logan Thomas, who they're bringing in, Cole Mullins. Maybe there's a Preston Zinter type of linebacker that they could move down at some point. I don't know if that would be in his future or not. I've always said that's a position I could see maybe him helping out at. Maybe Josh Burnham goes back over there for some reason. There's plenty of talent there, Salty. They just got to coach it up, and then those guys got to be locked in. Like, Jordan Patelho's biggest enemy is Jordan Patelho. And if he can just, when he's on, he's good. It's just this year, Vince, he was rarely on.
Right.
But then the bowl game, like, dude, if he plays like that every week, they're going to be pretty good at the Viper position.
Right.
And then I'm also curious to see what Junior Tuilamaka does in his second full year playing Viper too.
True.
Because he wasn't very good this year, but he's got some
talent there. Yeah, there's a lot of talent there that I would love to see.
He's still new to it. I mean, that's the thing we got to remember is, I mean, Junior and Josh didn't move to D-line until like their freshman years, and it wasn't even at the beginning.
Right.
Junior played it even less as a freshman than Josh did. So he's still learning. And hopefully you hope that in year 2 we can become a more effective player. Because, like, man,
Right.
playing Viper compared to Mike, it gets on you fast.
Yeah.
I mean, action happens quick. There's no read and react time. If you're trying to read and react playing Viper, you're getting punched in the face and get driven off the ball. It's just a different mentality and mindset that he's having to get used to. It's not the physicality is not different. It's just it gets to you so much quicker. It's like going from shortstop to third base. I mean,
Yes.
ground ball's a ground ball, Vince. But that sucker gets on you in a hurry.
Yeah, they call it the hot corner for a reason.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep. A lot faster. And you'd be surprised at how fast in comparison. That's for sure. 99 problems, BK1. I don't know the snap count this year along the D line. That said, do you think we'll see pretty even snaps between first and second string D line in 24 and some healthy snaps for the third string too?
No, you will not see the second team D line across the board getting as many snaps as the first team. No way. There's no way you can justify to me having anyone play more snaps at nose tackle than Howard Cross or 3 technique than Riley Mills.
Right.
Now, could you see maybe a little bit more of a share happen in a lot of games? Sure. Like, against Northern Illinois and Purdue and Miami of Ohio, and maybe you ramp up the reps for Jason Onye and Gabriel Rubio and Donovan Heinisch and Armel Mukum and those guys. Sure. But in the big games, you're still going to have those number one guys dominating the reps. Now, there could be some positions where you see more of that, like big end, right? You could maybe see RJ Oben and Josh Burnham be real similar 50-50 in snaps. I could see something like that. But across the board, that won't happen. Now, will there be games where this happens? Yes. When they're blowing a team out and you're going to get those young guys in more, sure, that'll happen. But on the whole, you won't see it that way.
Right. Agreed. And you don't want it to be.
No.
Personally, you're a starter for a reason. Like, that's.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a situation where you've recruited so well that your number 2 is every bit as good as your number 1, sure. And they both have experience, and sure, but that just rarely happens.
That's gonna be rare.
Rarely happens.
Andre Tonsel, I believe that this year's defense made very good strides, but not championship defense until they win the national championship. I'm very happy with the direction they are going.
Yeah, see, I understand. I understand what you're saying, Andre. I do. I just don't agree with it because it's like you can't punish one side of the ball because another side didn't do their job.
Correct.
I mean, you can't. A pitcher goes out there and pitches a 2-hitter and only gives up 1 yard or 1 run and they lose 9-0 or 1-0. You don't say, well, he didn't pitch well enough.
He didn't do his job. Yeah. You can't do that. Like, Notre Dame has had, yes, they had the championship level defense this year. Their defense was good enough this year overall, I think, to win a national championship. And they've had defenses in the past that have been good enough to win a national championship, let's say in the last 20 years. There's been times where that's been the case. But like you said, it's not a full team effort. The offense hasn't been good enough. And look, we've been saying that for a while. Like, you need to be able to score. There's certain things you need to do offensively in order to win a national championship. They've had a defense that could do it if they had a corresponding offense. This just hasn't been the case. They haven't put 1 and 2 together yet. They've had 1. They just haven't had 1 and 2.
Right. Yeah. Agree. I feel like if the entire team played the way that the defense played this year, we might be watching Notre Dame play on Monday.
Right.
Or that's the way I look at it.
Yeah. Agreed. 99 problems as things stand today, both where the player is at and where the staff is at with a quote unquote comfort level. What do you think the odds are of Boubacar taking the starting spot?
I mean, slim. I mean, barring injury, slim. I mean, he's got to pass up Junior Tuihalamaka and Jordan Botelho to be the starter.
Yeah.
And I don't see that. Now, if he does, that probably doesn't mean Jordan Botelho took a big step back. It probably means Boubacar took a giant step forward. But even then, you're probably still going to want him to be more of a limit the reps early on, kind of guy. But I'd say the odds are less than 50-50.
Yeah.
Significantly less than 50-50 that happens. 2025, sure. Late in the year, maybe. But barring injury, I'd be surprised if it happens that way.
Back up. Mailbag question. If you're playing NCAA 24, what position changes do you make this offseason?
I would move Jaden Mickey inside to nickel, and I'd move Clarence Thomas to safety. Those are the two big ones for me.
Clarence Lewis.
Yeah. What did I say? Clarence Thomas? Did I do it again?
It just
Clarence
makes me
Lewis.
laugh every time
He's
you
like
do it.
70-something years old. There's no way he could play safety at Notre Dame. Clarence Lewis. Did I do it? Did I do it again? It's like, it just makes me think of that scene. One of my favorite commercials ever. It's a Volkswagen commercial. And it's the one, oh man, what's the name of the song? It's, oh my goodness. It's gonna bother me. Take on Me. It's the Take on Me one, right?
Okay.
And it's one of my favorite commercials because at the end of it, he's like, does that high pitched song thing, and then all of a sudden he wakes up and he goes, "Is that me? Was I singing?" It's like I lose it every time I watch that commercial. I'm like, is it me? Did I say Clarence Thomas again? Yeah. So my bet on that. I would move Clarence Lewis to safety.
Agreed.
And I would move Jaden Mickey to nickel. Not because I don't think he can play corner. I just want to get him and Christian Gray and Benjamin Morris on the field together more. And I think Jaden could be a really good nickel.
Yeah.
That would be one that I would consider moving. And then I would consider moving Sullivan Absher inside to guard and let him compete at left guard next year. Because if there became a time where Charles Jagasaw and Sullivan Absher are playing side by side, that is a massive 6'6", 6'7", 330 plus duo that I'm just like, good luck not stopping Notre Dame from running the ball that direction. Those would be the changes that I would make.
If this was simply a video game, okay, and that's what the question is, it's just a video game. So we're not taking into account the mental side of things with guys, right? I love Junior at middle linebacker. I would move him back. I would. I can't get out of my head seeing him at middle linebacker when he committed, and then when I saw him as a young player, I would move him back to middle linebacker. I realize where everything's at now from a depth standpoint. He's probably at his best
in a
spot.
body standpoint. I mean, it's harder to take that weight off and then get your quickness. It's hard to do that.
Sure. No, he's completely remade his body and all of that from what he was as a middle linebacker. You know what I mean? And so obviously that would prevent this. So I'm saying in a video game scenario is where I would do it, not in real life. And so just to be different, because I agree with your
now, if you and I are wrong, and he could lose that weight and get back to being the kind of middle, I mean, I'd be okay with that because I could see him being like a number 2 behind Drake Bowen and being a pretty good part of the linebacker rotation. But I just don't know that you can get that quickness back. Yeah. And he was a guy that was already borderline not athletic enough. Like he was just losing a step away from being not athletic enough to play that position. So yeah, it's a good one.
99 Problems. Question of the future of defensive ends at Notre Dame. Do you think the staff is moving more towards left-right end strategy where both are playmakers instead of big end and viper?
No, I don't think so. I think they like the idea of field and now. I mean, is there a scenario where depending on who you have, you could do that? Sure, but I don't see anything that's making me think they're going in that direction.
Right. I think they're recruiting in the direction of having both. Yeah.
Now, if they get into a situation where they have like Josh Burnham and Boubacar Traore are your two ends, I mean, there's a lot of merit to, if you're playing a tempo team, to stay on a side. The thing is, though, the technique is a lot different from one to the other. Like cornerback's cornerback. If you're just saying field boundary, you're still a corner. I mean, there's some technical differences, but you're still a corner. Field boundary receiver, there's some minor differences, but it's not playing field end compared to viper is, I mean, one, you've got your hand in the ground. One, you're standing up. One, you're getting double teamed a lot more than the other.
Sure.
The other, you're playing in some. I mean, it's just different. It's not like nose tackle versus 3 technique where you're just kind of it's interchangeable to a degree. There's a lot of differences on how you play.
Right.
That would make it a little harder to just from one snap to the next, going from one to the other. It'd be a little bit more challenging. It can be done, and with certain players, I could see it happening, but I don't believe I've haven't been given any indication that that's the direction they're going. And I don't know that I would like that if they did, to be honest with you.
NC Notre Dame fan. Brian, would you ever do a call-in show? We get this question
No,
a decent amount.
I've thought about it for like a second. Number one, we don't have the technology for it. We could get it, but I just don't have a desire to do it.
Right.
It would be expensive to get the editing technique you would need to bleep out anybody that would say something, because it would take one person to just
To screw it all up.
completely ruin it. And
Right.
that there's idiots that, watch the show because they hate it, that
Right.
would love an opportunity to try to do something stupid.
Yep.
And, now there are some things I've thought about, like doing like a mailbag where if members of the message board could record like a question,
bring it up. Yeah.
and then we bring it up, like take video of themselves asking a
Sure.
question, and then we play
Yeah,
that. I've
that's
thought about
doable.
that.
That's very doable.
I've thought about doing something like that, like a preseason thing, something like that. But as far as a live call-in show, no, I have no interest in doing that right now.
Right. Yeah, I can
Right.
appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, if let's say we like partner with a local radio show and they wanted to do something, sure, I'd be okay doing that, because they already have all the things you need, and they would have, people on the back end to do all that, producers and to do all that could, mute out
Right.
anyone that does or says something dumb. But and the thing is, like 99.9% of the people would be great. They'd be awesome. Great
Yes, they would.
questions.
100%.
It's just that one person that would, ruin it for everybody.
Yep. Titus, why do you think Botelho disappointed this year? Was it simply that he hasn't adjusted to his extra weight? Coach Landau's ability to help his dexterity and agility is the key for next year.
I think that's part of it, Titus. I mean, I don't think he had the same burst this year that he had last year. I don't think the extra weight helped him. I don't think it's that simple, though. I mean, he's still too undisciplined at times. He'll still even in the bowl game, take a high angle up the field and allow a quarterback to just step right into the gap. I feel like his technique as the year wore on got real sloppy when it came to taking on the run. He had no sort of feel for the pass rush this year like he had last year. There's a lot of things to it. It wasn't just that he lost a step by gaining weight. It's part of it, but I don't think that's the only reason. I just don't think he's an overly focused player. The good news is when he is focused, he's really good. You need to run, Vince? Everything good?
Yeah, no, I just got a message about something that's tragic, but it's not
Okay.
Doesn't affect me directly. So
you good though?
Yeah, I'll be
okay. Sorry to hear that, man.
Yeah, it's life, unfortunately. All right, 99 problems. Can you compare Riley Leonard to Milroe? I recently was telling someone that I thought Riley Leonard was a better quarterback. Do you agree or disagree? I think of it this way. Milroe on that Duke team, better or worse?
I mean, Riley Leonard to me is absolutely a better quarterback than Jalen Milroe. I don't even think it's a question. Jalen, I've said this before. Jalen Milroe got a lot of hype this year because he was at Alabama. That's why he got a lot of hype this year.
Sure.
He's a
they
solid
had no
player.
idea who their quarterback was going to be going
Right.
into the season. So it's not like he was head and shoulders above everybody that was there.
Right. He's a nice player. That's it. I mean, that's it. He's a nice player.
Yeah.
I think he's very overhyped. And if he did what he did at anywhere else, he would not be getting the hype that he's getting. He just wouldn't. I mean, when you look at the production he had in his first year as a starter, he did some good things. He completed 65.8% of his passes, and Riley Leonard completed 63.8% of his passes. Jalen Milroe passed for 2,834 yards. Riley Leonard passed for 2,967. Jalen Milroe had a much higher yards per attempt average because of the offense he played in. 23 touchdowns and 6 picks, and Riley Leonard had 20 touchdowns and 6 picks. And then you look at the rushing numbers. Jalen Milroe had 531 rushing yards, 3.3 yards per attempt, and he had 12 touchdowns. Riley Leonard had 699 yards, 5.6 yards per attempt, and 13 touchdowns. So to me, there's no doubt you put Riley Leonard at Alabama with the talent around him that Jalen Milroe had, which is not great. It's not what it used to be, but it's certainly better than what Duke had. He would be much more productive, and I think we're going to see that next year. There's no doubt in my mind that we'll see that next year.
Michael Johnson, do you think Brian Kelly feels some type of way that Notre Dame is spending money on coaches and the recruiting upgrades under Marcus Freeman?
He probably does, but Brian Kelly had a lot of money given to him
Yeah.
during his tenure.
Yes, he did.
Like all this stuff about, they wouldn't pay coach. Notre Dame has never competed for coaches the way they needed to, but like big picture, but that started to improve in the last 10 years. I mean, I've said this, Jack Swarbrick's done a lot of those type of things. And
I don't think the recruiting upgrades are something that Brian Kelly was necessarily looking for.
Well,
you
I mean,
know what I mean?
Got him. I mean, Chad Bowden got hired when Brian Kelly was still the head coach.
That's
as
true.
Marcus Freeman's defensive guy. I mean, that's something
that's a good point
that they started here. But why did that happen? Because Marcus Freeman demanded it as part of the negotiation. Brian Kelly never fought for that.
Exactly.
Marcus Freeman did.
Right. That's what I'm saying about the recruiting upgrades. It's like I don't think he was ever really in that arena to be pissed off about it now that it's happening.
No, he never fought for the things that Marcus is fighting for.
Right, exactly.
But that doesn't mean he still won't feel a certain way. And because Brian Kelly's the king of blaming other people's for his own failures. And so, where Marcus Freeman's just like, look, I didn't get the job done this year. I'm gonna do better. I'm gonna go get better players and make sure we get what we need in the coaching staff and all those type of things. So, a lot of that stuff is just Brian Kelly just being Brian Kelly.
Yeah.
And just not doing what's needed, not demanding what's needed, and then crying about it. And the other thing too is, like, if you're Jack Swarbrick and you look at Brian Kelly's track record of hiring assistant coaches down the stretch, it's not good.
Right.
I mean, look, I'll say it again. Brian Kelly's not the reason Mike Elko came to Notre Dame. Jack Swarbrick is. Brian Kelly was looking to get out after 2016. He wanted out. His agent was pimping him to anybody that would take him, and nobody would take him.
Right.
During that period of time, Jack Swarbrick and his top people were the ones doing the pursuit of guys like Mike Elko and Chip Long. That is a fact. That's not rumor. That's a fact. So then Mike Elko's the reason that Clark Lee came.
Yeah.
So outside of him going and getting Marcus Freeman, which was a great move by Brian Kelly, a lot of these moves that Brian Kelly made, his desire to hire certain guys was not strong. Right? I mean, it was Jack Swarbrick is the one that got the ball rolling that got us to Mike Elko and Clark Lee. Because if Clark Lee doesn't come with Mike Elko, who was pursued by Jack Swarbrick, then we don't get to Clark Lee being the replacement for Mike Elko.
Sure.
So, I don't think he had the track record to me to warrant going in there and demanding X amount of dollars to go out and hire this coach or that coach. And as I think you've pointed out before too, Brian Van Gorder got a large salary to come to Notre Dame. And that was a bone of contention with certain members of the Notre Dame coaching staff, because they're like, this dude just had the worst defense in the history of Auburn football, literally. And he's coming here and he's making over $1 million when, like, these other coaches are doing better jobs and he's not, you know what I mean? Like, so I don't know that Brian Kelly warranted earning that.
Right.
In my opinion. So
that's a good call. James Patricia, thank you so much. Let's see. Will Angeli get a chance to compete for the starting job with 7 question marks?
Sure. I mean, look, if Steve Angeli goes out there this spring and he's the better quarterback day after day after day, he'll be the starter.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no guarantees to Riley Leonard. He'll be the starter. It's not going to happen, though.
Right. Exactly.
He's not that player. He's not that type of quarterback. He's not as good as Riley Leonard.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how anyone could watch like Riley Leonard over a period of time and then watch Steve Angeli in one bowl game against a depleted team who wasn't very good defending the pass anyway. And I know this is going to like cause some major butt hurt with some people in the fan base that just like now think Steve Angeli is like the next great quarterback at Notre Dame. I understand that.
Yep.
But he threw for 236 yards against a depleted secondary that wasn't very good defending the pass to begin with. And Steve did a very good job. This is what bothers me about this whole debate. You're forcing me to say these things with your crying about how we're not giving him enough respect.
Right.
He threw for 236 yards against a bad secondary that was depleted. Right? That's a fact. Now, if Steve wants to beat out Riley Leonard, he's going to have to play a lot better than he did in the bowl game, because they're not going to play teams that bad week after week after week.
Right.
Is it could it happen? Sure. And I wouldn't be upset if he does that. Like, if Steve Angeli is the guy that some people think he is and can go win Notre Dame national championship, great.
Right.
Great. There's no evidence of it, though. There just isn't. And with Riley Leonard, we've seen him play in these big moments. We've seen him go, beat Clemson. We've seen him go and out-duel Sam Hartman and beat Sam Hartman. We've seen him play great football. We've seen him rush for over 100 yards in a game, something he's done multiple times. So he's got 5 games over 90. He's got 13 rushing touchdowns in 2022. He had 4 last year in 5 games before he got hurt, right? We've seen him throw for over 300 yards. We've seen him do all these things on a much more regular basis, and he's just got more talent. That's my opinion. But so I'll say there's not a quarterback battle. In my opinion, there's not. There's no thought that Tyler Buckner and Sam Hartman last year. It's a different situation.
Right.
Riley Leonard's being brought in to be the quarterback. Having said that, if Steve Angeli outplays him all spring and fall camp, then yes, Steve Angeli can and should beat him out and be the starting quarterback.
Mm-hmm. But you guys got to remember here's the other thing. To a man, everybody over at Notre Dame that's involved with the football program wants to win. They're going to put on the field who they think gives them the best opportunity to win. If it is obvious that name your quarterback is better than Riley Leonard in practice, then that guy is going to start, whoever that is. But the odds of that happening aren't very good. Right. Is that the best way to put it, Brian? I mean,
Sure.
These coaches, they're not going to be like, you know what? This kid's better than this kid, but I'm going to play this kid because I want to lose. Like that.
Or because we promised this kid that. I mean, that's just not how it's going to work.
Yeah, it's just not it. It's not it.
No.
Tyler Evans with a super chat. Thank you, Tyler. Out of 4 playoff teams, which one will have the biggest drop-off next year?
I think probably Washington.
Yeah, because they're going to lose Penix, which is massive.
They're going to lose Penix. Really they're going to lose Adunze. I think they're going to lose Dylan. I mean, they're going to lose Braylon Trice, and they're going to replace Penix with Will Rogers, which is just no.
Yeah.
And they're going to the Big Ten, and they're going to play a pretty tough, if I remember correctly, their schedule's pretty challenging next season. Let me pull it up. They play Washington State on a neutral field. They play at Iowa, at Penn State, at Oregon. They get Michigan at home, UCLA at home, USC at home, no Ohio State. So, I mean, their schedule's tough. It's not brutal bad, but there's probably 3 to 4 losses in there. I don't see Michigan. Michigan's one that could maybe have a drop off next year too, because their schedule is a lot tougher. Next year.
That was you walked me into the schedule because you're starting to talk about the Big Ten schedule next year. I am taking all hatred of Michigan aside and just looking at it from an analytical standpoint. Look, there's a chance that Michigan has a completely new coaching staff. Number one,
sure,
I mean, that's a possibility. Number 2, they could potentially lose their quarterback, and they're playing a schedule that is light years harder next year than it was this year.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a lot to kind of deal with. So they could take a drop off just from a record standpoint because of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why Michigan might have been my choice, just because of the schedule and the potential of a complete staff overhaul.
Yeah, but to me, if that happens, then I'll address that. But as of right now, we don't know that that's going to be the case. I mean, for all we know, Kalen DeBoer could get snatched up by some NFL team this offseason. You know what I mean? Like, anything can happen. Ryan Grubb could get a head coach job somewhere. I don't see it happening, but based off what we do know, I would say probably Washington takes the biggest drop off. Michigan would be my next, though, Vince. I'll be honest with you, because of the toughness of their schedule and the things that we do know, which is they are going to lose a lot from this year's team. And, if a more likely thing to debate is will a guy go pro or not, as opposed to the whole team staff leaving, that's a little bit different debate. Certainly possible. I mean, look, Jim Harbaugh hiring the agent he did is not a move he makes to renegotiate his contract at Michigan. Right? Can we be honest about that? That's a move like this last week he hired a new agent who deals with all NFL guys.
Hmm.
Right. I mean, so your point is valid,
Yeah.
Vince. It's just like
I
until it
get it.
happens, I can't really
No,
discuss
I
it.
get that. Yeah,
JJ
no, I
McCarthy
totally get
leaving is a little bit more like, okay, that's possible. But to me, I think those two things will be kind of tied together. I think if Jim Harbaugh comes back, I think JJ McCarthy comes back.
I do agree with.
Right. But if Jim Harbaugh leaves, then I could see McCarthy leaving.
There's no bigger cheerleader on this planet than Jim Harbaugh for JJ McCarthy. So
oh my goodness gracious.
I mean, he would come back. Like why?
Yeah.
Why would
Fellas
you not?
who are single, women who are single, find you someone that loves you like Jim Harbaugh loves JJ McCarthy.
Man, you're not kidding.
And you will have a happy life.
Woo!
There's no doubt.
There's
no doubt.
And why would you leave that if you were JJ? I mean, I was. Ben Tarnowski, Mailbag Part 1. I put this on the board yesterday, but it was a concern for Faison to play lacrosse in the spring in terms of his development. New OC, wide receiver coach, quarterback, chemistry is vital.
And then he has a second parter to that too, Vince.
Not saying this is part 2, not saying that they're the same, but it didn't seem to affect Samardzija Tate or Komet to play baseball, but maybe it affected Hunter Jr. Thoughts?
I don't think it affected Torrey Hunter Jr. much at all. I don't know that Torrey Hunter Jr. played much baseball at Notre Dame.
He played some, but not very much.
Yeah.
And
he played more in the pros than he did at Notre Dame.
And Golden Tate didn't play a whole lot either because he was a position player. Samardzija and Komet played more because they were pitchers and they could just come in and pitch. You know what I mean? So like, it is a different conversation.
Yeah. Look at this. He only played 23 games. Torrey Hunter Jr. By the way.
Yeah, and most of his games were like pinch running and stuff like that.
I just don't think number one, baseball and football are sports that you can go to football practice in the morning and baseball practice in the afternoon. If you're 100%. A kid like Jordan Faison, so that's a little different. I don't know.
Yeah.
How lacrosse translates. I just don't know enough about the sport. Having watched what little bit I have, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, it's endurance, it's quickness, it's toughness. And so I don't think like basketball is a different animal. Like basketball is a completely different type of mindset than football. And it's like, you got to lose weight during basketball season. You need to, you can't be as beefy.
Sure.
It's just a little bit different. And I think that would make that transition a little bit more challenging. But I think the way that the football team does things with lacrosse, for example, Jordan comes in on days they don't have games. He'll practice with the football team in the morning, go to class, and then go to lacrosse practice that afternoon. That's how it works.
And both coaches work together,
right?
As far as like a physical plan, like how much are they? Because they've got those the catapult, right? That they can. I'm sure the lacrosse team uses those too,
right? Hey, we need to. He's slowing down a little bit. We need to make sure, but there's only 15 football practices, and he can be a part of. The other part of it too, Vince, for me is the position you play matters. Like to me, playing baseball could have a bigger negative impact for Drake Bowen than Jordan Faison playing lacrosse, because Jordan Faison playing lacrosse doesn't have to. I mean, he's a receiver. He's just running all day. You know what I mean? Like. And then you've got all summer to get in the weight room, and you can throw 1 million balls over the summer and things like that. And that's really the only thing that hurts you. I don't think a receiver gets really impacted. And let's not forget this. He did everything he did. That kid barely played any receiver in high school. He was a quarterback and stuff.
Was he really?
He didn't barely play receiver. He's just a natural athlete and a smart kid and catches the ball well. And those things aren't going to change. And even if he barely practiced in the spring, he's going to have plenty of time in the fall. And in summer workouts, I should say more summer workouts, to catch 1 million balls from Riley Leonard.
Yeah.
And get on that same page.
Yep. And then all of fall camp too.
Right. But he will still practice in the spring.
Yeah.
So I don't think his development's going to be hurt as much as maybe we think. As long as he's still practicing it. Let's say they have 14 practices and then there's the blue gold game. If he only plays in half the practices, he'll still keep sharp enough at his. Now, again, different positions would be middle linebacker. That might be more impactful. Quarterback, that's going to be more impactful.
Yeah.
Other positions, that's going to be more impactful. Slot receiver, I just don't think it's going to impact them a whole lot. So this isn't true for everybody that's going to play multiple sports. I think, like I said, I think Drake Bowen, if he's missing half a spring to play baseball, that will hurt him more than Jordan Faison missing half a spring
Drake
playing lacrosse.
Bowen is a third baseman, I believe. I'm not sure exactly what he's going to do at Notre Dame, but he's a position player. And so that's different when you're an everyday player versus a pitcher, for example.
Like Samardzija.
Right. That's
Cole
a
Kmet.
huge.
Right.
I mean, when Samardzija was here, he played in the blue gold game and then ran across the parking lot and pitched in a game. Like, so it is completely
I think
different.
Cole Kmet did that where he would actually was at practice in the morning.
Yeah.
And then pitched later that night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to do that as a pitcher than it is to do that as an everyday player for the baseball team. So you're absolutely right.
Position like receiver.
Yes.
Where
and there was an interview I saw yesterday he did with somebody where he was talking. I think it was the podcast that Notre Dame does, the Wake Up the Echoes, I think is what they call it. Anyway, they interviewed him and he was talking about the similarities between playing midfield in lacrosse and playing wide receiver, and how there's a lot of similarities the way he runs his routes as the way he runs in lacrosse and things of that nature. So there, again, a lot of similarities with what he's doing. I would say it's more of a mental side of things, learning a potential new offense, or the nuances of a new offensive coordinator, that kind of stuff. And that's a mental side of things. I mean, you can jump into your iPad and learn it and do some different things. And like you said, he'll be able to come to practice. He may not be a 100% full go situation if he's got, lacrosse practice and things of that nature too. But at the end of the day, Brian, let's not forget, he is now a full scholarship player for football. Football is now his number one priority.
Right.
I mean, that does matter here. Right. That does matter. And I honestly don't know. Again, this is going to be my ignorance of the lacrosse game, right? Is it like hockey where you have like waves of guys coming on and off the field? Are you on the field the whole time? They have a massive roster for lacrosse, and there's not that many guys on the field. That tells me there's probably some rotation and things of that nature in the game. And again, I'm not 100% sure. So I don't even know how much they're going to be leaning on him. Remember, this is the number one team in the country. Is he coming in and going to be like an integral part of the rotation? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. So there's a lot of unanswered questions in my opinion, but I guarantee you the coaching staff of both programs are going to be working together to make sure they're going to get the best out of him in both regards.
Yeah, no doubt. All right. Let's go to the next one here. Got a couple more left before we get out of here, Vince.
All right. Jason Rose, Notre Dame has a very good recruiting staff among assistant coaches. Which one of those guys would you feel most comfortable sending into a room and beating other top assistants?
Well, Mike Denbrock. Yeah. I mean, he said assistant coaches.
Assistant. You're right.
Well, number one, Chad Bowden, but
yes.
Mike Denbrock, Dylan McCullough, Mike Mickens. Those are it for me for right now that I feel real comfortable beating top assistants. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be my list as well. I'm trying to think of the other guys in my head.
I mean, I don't know enough about Mike Brown to say that. Oh, Joe Rudolph.
Right.
I mean, you can't ignore Joe Rudolph's track record so far. I mean, just his first year, he's done a really heck of a job.
That's true.
But I don't know enough about Mike Brown. Gino Gaduli did a nice job with Deuce Knight, but I just need to see a little bit more from him. Chris O'Leary, no. Al Golden, no. And Al Washington to beat other top. I mean, Al Washington's landed some really good players, but they haven't exactly beaten like Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia for those guys. So I still need to see that a little bit. And this Chris Burgess recruitment this weekend will be a chance. Now, again, it's Notre Dame, Alabama, Michigan, Ohio State. It is not set in stone at all that he's going to pick Notre Dame. We'll see. I mean, talking to Ryan today, it sounds like we don't know that a decision has officially been made yet from Chris Burgess. So if Al Washington can win that one, that's great. That'll be a step in the right direction towards beating the big boys for a top kid. If you don't win that one, then it's just further evidence that even though he's improved, it's not there yet. Yeah. You're going to lose another kid in your backyard that you wanted. But if you can win that one, then all of a sudden I care less about the Justin Scott loss last year. That's what I mean. What it boils down to. So he's not quite there yet. Hopefully he will be by the end of this cycle.
Yeah.
And hopefully, landing Chris Burgess and Damian Shanklin will be the way that can get you there for me, in my view.
Like that. Brett Lott, do you feel J.J. McCarthy is to Michigan as Gino Torretta was to Miami? Average quarterback on a good team? I only ask because clickbait articles suggest that Notre Dame dropped the ball on his recruitment. They didn't drop the ball. They went a different direction.
They liked Tyler Buckner better.
Right.
Simple as that. They didn't drop the ball. JJ McCarthy is he is a better quarterback than Gino Torretta to me, because they ask him to make more plays with his legs and stuff. But no, he's not nearly the quarterback they make him out to be. And he did some nice things against Michigan. Against Alabama. But again, it's not like he went out there and just, just lit the world on fire and just threw it.
It was the end of the game
right.
That really...
And he's not being asked to do for Michigan what Michael Penix and Bo Nix have to do it for their teams.
Sure.
Especially Michael Penix. So no, but he's also like I said, a better, I always felt like Miami kind of won in spite of Gino Torretta back in the day. I never understood that Heisman deal, but you're talking about a kid that's played 14 games and he's thrown for 2,800 yards, 22 touchdowns, 4 picks. He's ran for 171 yards and 3 touchdowns, 25 touchdowns in 14 games. Just doesn't blow me away. Yeah. But he's a kid that's completing 73% of his passes and only has 4 interceptions, and has made some throws in some big games that he's needed to make.
Yeah.
But sure. This is a kid in the last 4 games of the season, he passed for 60 yards against Penn State, 141 against Maryland, 148 against Ohio State, and 147 against Iowa, averaged 7.5 yards or less per attempt in those games. And in that same stretch had 1 touchdown and 1 interception. He's not what they make him out to be.
Right.
He's just not. But he's also not, part of that's just they don't ask him to do a whole lot. I think JJ could do more if they gave him an opportunity to do more.
Right. I agree with that.
That's the difference for me, is that right there. So I just, just because Jim Harbaugh says that, I've said this before, Charlie Weiss said that Brady Quinn was better than Tom Brady. So just because the coach says that doesn't mean it's actually true. So
Beezer 12, washing beard. Is there fire to the BK to Michigan smoke? Well, there has to be an opening first.
Yeah, there is smoke to it because it's what Trace Armstrong always does to try to negotiate more money for his client. I was watching the LSU game and I couldn't believe that they said this. I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Rodney Gilmore. But he's like, Brian Kelly being linked to other schools, that's just what Brian Kelly does. That's just always a Brian Kelly thing. He flat out said that. Oh, yeah,
wow,
in the LSU game, Wisconsin game. Because there's rumors about the Michigan stuff, and it's that's what Trace Armstrong does.
Yeah.
Brian Kelly's not happy at LSU, and LSU's not happy with Brian Kelly. Now, depending on who you talk to, this whole cleaning house on the defensive staff was not Brian Kelly's idea.
Sound familiar?
Yeah. And so, we'll see if, Brian Kelly is going to look for an out. Do I think if Michigan offered Brian Kelly the job that he would take it? Absolutely, I do. Would Michigan offer him that job? I don't know. I have no idea. Yeah. I'm skeptical. Just my own gut is skeptical because of the money they'd have to pay as a buy. I'd have to go look at his contract, Vince. I don't know what the buyout at Brian Kelly is, but he's got a big contract.
Yes.
I would assume it's got a pretty decent buyout.
I would think so. Now,
if LSU wants him gone, then maybe they negotiate with Michigan to lower his buyout.
Right.
But I would assume, are you looking it up now?
Yeah.
I'm curious what that is. Because I don't know what, it's not like a Jimbo Fisher type deal, but you'd have to find out. LSU would basically probably have to say, hey, yeah, we'll work with you on the buyout. Because I've been told by some people that they're not, the money people down there aren't super thrilled with the job Brian Kelly's doing so far.
Right.
But, I'm
looking for it. I don't see it in this particular article.
Yeah. Do I think that,
$3 million.
That's it?
It's $3 million before. Well, it would have been $3 million before December 31st. It's $2 million any point after that.
That's it.
It's only $2 million. That's what it says.
Whew.
Yeah.
Okay, then Michigan. Then the buyout won't impact it.
No,
I still just have a heart. If Jim Harbaugh leaves, why wouldn't they just promote Sharon Moore?
Right.
You know what I mean? That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Try to keep the continuity together and all that. Yeah.
But Brian Kelly, I don't think Brian Kelly's as well liked in Michigan as he thinks he is.
Right.
But
you know what? If we take the everything out of it, right, and you're looking at just the profile, Brian Kelly to Michigan makes a heck of a lot more sense than Brian Kelly to LSU.
You said Helk.
I know, because I was trying.
I know.
Not
I
to
appreciate
say
you not, but yes.
Brian Kelly to Michigan makes a heck of a lot more sense because Brian Kelly's always been a Midwest coach. He started in Michigan.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was in Michigan twice as a head coach. Like, it makes more sense for him to be at Michigan than it does for him to be at LSU. Yeah. Obviously, he went to LSU because they offered him a gold mine. I mean, of course, that makes sense. The SEC and all that.
You know the fan base that would rejoice the most if Brian Kelly took the Michigan job?
This one?
No. This would be number 2.
Okay.
This fan base would rejoice much more than Michigan fan base. The fan base that would rejoice the most if Brian Kelly got hired at Michigan would be Ohio State.
Oh, because they know yes. Yeah, no doubt about that. Yeah, no doubt about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I just don't see that one happening, man. I just
it's hard for me to see it as well, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I just don't see it making sense for Michigan. Like, I don't know why they would want to hire him.
Right.
You know
agreed.
what I mean? Like,
yes, agreed.
But I also didn't understand why LSU wanted him, to be honest with you. So, I mean,
his national profile, for whatever reason, is way different than his profile amongst fan bases that he has been a part of.
Yeah, and I've had people say, why would he want to walk into this NCAA stuff? I actually think that's perfect for Brian Kelly.
It's an excuse. It's a built-in excuse.
Yes.
That's how he rolls, man. Come on.
That would be the most legitimate excuse he'd ever have as a coach.
100%. Well, we could only do so much.
We only have X number of scholars. I mean, people are still making excuses for James Franklin not winning now because of the sanctions that happened a decade ago.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He would
he would ride that so long.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt about that. No doubt about that. Oh my gosh.
That would be hilarious. I just don't see it. I just don't see Michigan going that direction.
There's a lot of things about
I think this is more
Michigan.
Trace Armstrong creating this narrative than it is about Michigan people wanting.
Well, the first time
I could be completely wrong on that. That's just my opinion.
First time it came up was like a radio guy, right? Or a podcast guy that brought it up. I don't know. Yeah. It just seems, and it's gotten legs from there.
Yeah. Was it an LSU guy? It was an LSU guy.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Matt Moscona and one other guy said it. So LSU people. So again, I don't know if this is Trace Armstrong doing Trace Armstrong things, or if Brian Kelly genuinely wants out, or if Michigan. But everything's been from the LSU side. I haven't heard anything come from the Michigan side about how they would be interested in Brian Kelly.
Right. Well, they're busy trying to win a national championship. So
yeah, I know, right? Seriously, Brian Kelly doesn't know a whole lot about it at this level.
No.
So
no.
Yeah. Yep. Anyway, well, Vince, that's
all right.
That's gonna do it, man.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on this edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends, send us a 5-star review, all those fun things. And then, of course, make sure you stay locked in to Irish Breakdown, boards at irishbreakdown.com. If you're not a member yet, what are you waiting for? Jump on board. It's the best deal out there for message boards. And it is not, dare I say it, is not the cesspool of message boards that are out there. I will say it because I can. You're just going to get good quality back and forth, and you're going to get good quality intel is what you're going to get at boards at irishbreakdown.com. So come on over, come on in, join the party, join the family, and we'd love to have you. So make sure you stay locked in. Again, Jesse and I will be back in a couple of hours for IB Nation Sports Talk, and we're going to bring all the heat to you then as well. So until then, that's Brian. I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.